The pre-dawn silence of the Cascade Mountains broke only with the crunch of Michael Thompson's boots through 18 inches of fresh powder. At 28, he had been patrolling this section of the Washington state wilderness for 3 years, but the pristine beauty of winter mornings still caught his breath. Steam rose from his coffee thermos as he paused at Elk Ridge Overlook, watching the first pale light creep across the valley below. The temperature gauge on his pack read 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and the air bit sharp and clean in his lungs. Ancient Douglas firs stood like cathedral pillars, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally fell in soft whispers to the forest floor. This was his favorite time of day, when the forest belonged entirely to its wild inhabitants and to him, their reluctant guardian. Michael adjusted his snowshoes and continued down the familiar trail toward Beaver Creek. His morning routine had become sacred over the years. Check the weather station readings, inspect the trail markers, document any unusual animal activity, and most importantly, search for signs of illegal trapping. The practice had been banned in this protected area for over a decade, but old habits died hard among some of the local hunters. A raven's harsh call echoed through the trees, answered by another from deeper in the woods. Michael smiled at their conversation, wondering what forest gossip they shared. He had learned to read the language of the wilderness through such sounds. The alarm calls that meant predators were near, the contentment of feeding birds, the warning cries that signaled human intrusion. As he rounded a bend near the creek, something felt wrong. The usual morning chorus had gone silent. Even the creek's babbling seemed muted beneath its skin of ice. Michael stopped and listened, every sense alert. 20 yards ahead, partially hidden by a fallen log, something dark stained the white snow. His heart sank as he approached. A steel leg-hold trap, its jaws clamped around the front paw of a young wolf. The animal lay still, exhausted from struggling against the chain that anchored it to a buried stake. Its yellow eyes tracked Michael's movement, but showed no fear now, only the resigned weariness of an animal that had given up hope. Michael had seen trapped animals before, but the sight never became easier. This wolf was perhaps 2 years old, with the lean build of a subordinate pack member. Its dark gray coat was matted with snow and blood where the trap's teeth had bitten deep. The animal's breathing came in shallow pants, creating small clouds in the frigid air. Moving slowly to avoid startling the wolf, Michael knelt in the snow 10 feet away. He spoke in low, calming tones while studying the trap mechanism. It was an old Bridger model, probably set weeks ago and forgotten. The wolf's struggles had worn a circle in the snow, painted pink with frozen blood. The irony burned in Michael's chest. His job was to protect wildlife from exactly this kind of suffering, yet despite his best efforts, the old ways persisted. Some local hunters still viewed wolves as competitors for deer and elk, refusing to accept their role in maintaining healthy ecosystems. They set these illegal traps in remote areas, often forgetting their locations or abandoning them entirely when hunting seasons ended. Michael had dealt with trapped animals before, but wolves required special care. Their powerful jaws could easily take off a finger, and even an injured wolf retained the strength to cause serious harm. He reached for his emergency kit, which contained heavy gloves, a catch pole, and tools for disabling traps. The wolf watched his every movement but made no sound. Its intelligence was evident in those amber eyes, which seemed to study Michael with the same careful attention he was giving to the trap. There was no hatred there, no blame, only a wild animal's pragmatic assessment of a new threat. Working with practiced efficiency, Michael slipped on the Kevlar-lined gloves and approached from the side, where the trap chain restricted the wolf's movement. The animal tensed, but didn't struggle, perhaps understanding that this human meant no harm. With one hand, Michael grasped the trap's frame, and with the other, he compressed the spring mechanism that operated the jaws. The trap opened with a metallic click that seemed unnaturally loud in the winter silence. The wolf immediately pulled its injured paw free, but instead of fleeing, it remained lying in the snow, watching Michael with those penetrating eyes. The paw was badly swollen and bleeding, but no bones appeared broken. Michael backed away slowly, giving the wolf space to escape. For a long moment, human and animal regarded each other across the trampled snow. The wolf struggled to its feet, favoring the injured paw, and took a tentative step toward the tree line. Then it stopped and looked back at Michael, as if acknowledging what had just occurred. Something passed between them in that moment, not understanding exactly, but recognition. The wolf had learned that not all humans meant harm, and Michael had seen firsthand the consequences of humanity's casual cruelty toward the wild. The animal limped into the forest, moving with the fluid grace that injury could not entirely diminish. Michael remained kneeling in the blood-stained snow long after the wolf disappeared. The trap lay open beside him, its steel jaws gaping like a mechanical mouth. He thought about the animal's patient suffering, the hours or days it had spent chained to this spot, slowly freezing and starving. He thought about the hunter who had set the trap and then forgotten it, moving on to other pursuits while the wolf endured its private agony. Rising to his feet, Michael pocketed the trap and began documenting the incident in his daily log. GPS coordinates, weather conditions, estimated time of capture, condition of the animal, all the bureaucratic details that would justify his presence in this wilderness and perhaps, eventually, lead to stronger enforcement of anti-trapping laws. But as he snowshoed back toward the ranger station, Michael's mind was not on paperwork. He was thinking about those intelligent yellow eyes and the way the wolf had looked back at him before disappearing into the trees. Something had changed in that encounter, though he couldn't yet articulate what it was. The forest around him was waking up now. Squirrels chattered in the pine boughs, and a woodpecker drummed somewhere in the distance. The normal sounds of wilderness life resumed as if the morning's drama had never occurred. But Michael knew better. In 3 years of patrolling these mountains, he had learned that the forest forgot nothing and forgave even less. He would need to search for more traps, he realized. Where there was one, there were usually others. The thought filled him with grim determination. Somewhere out there, more animals might be suffering needlessly, their only crime being born wild in a world increasingly hostile to their existence. The sun had fully risen by the time Michael reached the ranger station, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and pink. It would be a beautiful day, the kind that drew tourists to the mountains and reminded him why he had chosen this profession. But beneath the beauty lay darker truths about the relationship between humans and a natural world. As he filled out his incident report, Michael found himself sketching the wolf's face in the margin of the page. Those eyes haunted him, intelligent, patient, somehow forgiving despite everything they had witnessed of human nature. He wondered if he would see the animal again, and whether it would remember the man who had freed it from the trap. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold, but Michael hardly noticed. His mind was already planning his next patrol route, mapping the areas where illegal traps were most likely to be hidden. There was work to be done, and lessons to be learned on both sides of the species divide. The old surveyor's map, spread across Michael's kitchen table, told stories in faded ink and yellowed paper. Dated 1962, it showed the Cascade Wilderness as it existed before federal protection, when hunting outfitters and trappers carved temporary roads through virgin forest and marked their territories with seasonal camps. Red circles dotted the landscape where Michael had identified likely trap sites based on conversations with longtime residents and his own growing knowledge of the terrain. Coffee steamed in his mug as morning light filtered through frost-covered windows. Outside, snow continued to fall in a steady, purposeful way that would add another 6 inches by evening. Michael studied the maps, topographical lines, cross-referencing them with modern GPS coordinates on his tablet. Somewhere in those contours lay dozens of forgotten traps, waiting like hidden landmines for unsuspecting wildlife. 3 days had passed since he freed the injured wolf, and the encounter had shifted something fundamental in his approach to the job. Previously, he had conducted trap searches as routine maintenance, checking obvious locations along major game trails. Now he understood the systematic nature of the problem. Professional trappers didn't place their devices randomly. They studied animal behavior, identified bottlenecks and natural funnels, and positioned their traps with scientific precision. The phone rang, interrupting his planning. Frank Kowalski's gravelly voice carried decades of cigarettes and mountain weather. "You the ranger asking about old trap lines?" Michael grabbed a pen. Frank had trapped these mountains legally for 30 years before the federal ban, and local hunters still considered him the authority on wildlife patterns. Getting him to talk required patience and the right approach. "Yes, sir. I'm trying to identify areas where old equipment might still be active." Figured as much after what happened up at Beaver Creek. Word travels fast in small towns. Michael wasn't surprised. The local community maintained its own information network, more efficient than any official communication system. Frank's next words confirmed his suspicions. "Found that wolf's tracks 3 days ago, up near Quarry Ridge. Limping pretty bad, but moving steady. Smart animal, already changing its route to avoid where you found that trap." The information was encouraging and troubling simultaneously. The wolf had survived its injury and demonstrated the intelligence to modify its behavior based on experience. But if it was avoiding traditional pathways, other pack members might unknowingly wander into similar dangers. "Mr. Kowalski, I'd appreciate any guidance you could provide about historical trap sites. I'm not looking to cause trouble for anyone, just trying to prevent more animals from getting hurt." The line went quiet for several seconds. When Frank spoke again, his tone had softened slightly. "Meet me at Miller's Hardware at 2 o'clock. Bring that map you've been working on." The conversation ended abruptly, leaving Michael to wonder if he had gained an ally or simply aroused more suspicion. Small mountain communities protected their own, and outsiders, even government rangers, were viewed with inherent wariness. But Frank's willingness to meet suggested a shared concern for preventing unnecessary animal suffering. Miller's Hardware occupied a narrow storefront on the town's main street, cramped with fishing tackle, camping supplies, and tools that hadn't changed design in 50 years. Frank Kowalski stood near the ammunition counter, a tall man whose weathered face suggested countless seasons in harsh conditions. His handshake was firm, calloused from decades of outdoor work. "You bring that map?" Michael unfolded the surveyor's chart on the store's single table, weighing the corners with boxes of rifle shells. Frank studied it for several minutes, occasionally pointing to specific locations and muttering to himself. His finger traced elevation contours and creek beds with the familiarity of someone who had walked every mile of the territory. "Here, and here," Frank finally said, marking 3 areas with a pencil stub. Those were the primary sets back in the day. Natural corridors where deer and elk had to funnel through. Any trapper worth his salt would have worked those spots. The marked locations were miles from the site where Michael had found the injured wolf, scattered across different watersheds and elevation zones. The scope of the potential problem was larger than he had imagined. What about higher elevations? Wolf territory? Frank's expression grew more thoughtful. Wolves weren't protected then, but most trappers focused on fur bearers, marten, fish, or lynx. Wolves were considered a nuisance, not a cash crop. But some of the old-timers set wolf traps anyway, just for the bounty. He marked two additional locations on the map, both above 8,000 feet where wolf packs typically established denning sites. These ridges see heavy wolf traffic. If someone was targeting them specifically, that's where they'd set up. Michael studied the new marks, calculating distances and elevation changes. Reaching all 5 sites would require several days of snowshoeing through challenging terrain, but the systematic approach felt right. Random searching had been inefficient. This targeted methodology offered better prospects for preventing future injuries. I appreciate this, Mr. Kowalski. Is there anything else I should know? The older man folded the map carefully and handed it back. Just remember that most folks who set those traps weren't evil. They were making a living the only way they knew how. Times changed, but some of the equipment got left behind. The comment carried implicit criticism of federal wildlife policies, but also acknowledged the reality of abandoned traps. Michael understood that he was navigating between conservation necessity and local resentment of government intervention. Success would require diplomacy as much as dedication. Back at the ranger station, Michael planned his search strategy. Each marked location would require a full day's round trip from the nearest road access. Weather conditions were crucial. Too much fresh snow would hide traps completely, while clear conditions after storms would reveal the subtle depressions and disturbances that marked human activity. The first site lay 8 miles up Dead Horse Creek, following a game trail that Frank had identified as a natural funnel between 2 ridges. Michael started before dawn, carrying emergency gear for an overnight stay if weather conditions deteriorated. His snowshoes bit cleanly into the crusted surface as he climbed steadily through dense timber. 2 hours later, he found the first trap. It was a conibear body trap, designed to kill instantly by crushing an animal's neck or chest. The device hung for a wooden frame positioned directly across the trail, at perfect height for a traveling marten or fisher. Snow had partially buried the mechanism, but recent thaws had revealed the steel trigger wires. Michael photographed the trap from multiple angles before carefully disarming it. The device was old but functional, probably set sometime in the 1990s and forgotten when trapping became illegal. Any animal unlucky enough to trigger the mechanism would have died instantly, but their carcass would have been lost to scavengers and weather. 300 yards further up the trail, he found 2 more conibears and a leg-hold trap similar to the one that had caught the wolf. All were positioned with professional skill at natural bottlenecks, where animals would be forced to step in predictable locations. The systematic placement suggested someone with extensive knowledge of wildlife behavior and considerable trapping experience. By afternoon, Michael had located and disabled 9 traps in the Dead Horse Creek drainage alone. Each discovery strengthened his resolve while deepening his understanding of the problem's scope. These weren't random devices left by casual hunters. They represented a comprehensive trapping system that had once covered hundreds of square miles. The hike back to his truck took place in gathering darkness, headlamp beam dancing across the snow ahead of his snowshoes. Michael's pack now carried 9 disabled traps, evidence of decades-old hunting practices that continued threatening wildlife long after their original purpose had been forgotten. That evening, he spread Frank's map across his table again and marked each trap location with precise GPS coordinates. The pattern was becoming clear, a network of devices positioned to intercept animals moving between feeding areas, water sources, and denning sites. Removing them all would require weeks of systematic searching, but each disabled trap represented potential lives saved. The wolf he had rescued 3 days earlier was just the beginning. Somewhere in these mountains, more animals moved through invisible minefields of abandoned steel, their survival dependent on luck and the careful work of humans who chose to undo the damage of earlier generations. Michael poured fresh coffee and opened his laptop to begin typing the day's report. 9 traps disabled, dozens more to find. The forest was keeping its secrets reluctantly, but patience and persistence were beginning to reveal the hidden dangers that threatened its wild inhabitants. Outside his window, snow continued falling in the darkness, covering his tracks and preparing the wilderness for tomorrow's search. The encounter occurred at the intersection of 2 game trails, where Quarry Ridge descended into the valley through a natural saddle between granite outcroppings. Michael had been following wolf tracks for the better part of an hour, noting how the pack moved in single file to conserve energy through the deep snow. The trail was fresh, probably made during the previous night's hunting expedition. He paused to examine a cluster of tracks where the wolves had stopped, perhaps to rest or investigate something interesting. The prints showed a family group, 2 large adults and 3 smaller animals, likely yearlings from the previous spring's litter. One set of tracks was noticeably different, showing the slight drag mark of an injured front paw. The wolf he had freed from the trap was still traveling with its pack, adapting to the limitation but keeping pace with the group. Michael was photographing the clearest prints when movement caught his peripheral vision. 50 yards ahead, where the trail curved around a massive Douglas fir, a wolf stood watching him. The animal made no attempt to hide, simply stood motionless in the dappled shadows, yellow eyes fixed on the human intruder in its territory. Time seemed suspended as man and wolf regarded each other across the snowy distance. This was clearly the alpha male, larger and more confident than the injured animal Michael had encountered days earlier. The wolf's coat was darker, nearly black along the shoulders and back, with silver-gray markings around the muzzle that suggested maturity and experience. Its ears were erect and alert, but showed none of the aggressive posturing Michael might have expected from a territorial predator confronting a potential threat. Michael remained perfectly still, understanding instinctively that any sudden movement would shatter this remarkable moment. The wolf seemed to be studying him with the same careful attention he was directing toward the animal. There was intelligence in those amber eyes, a calculation taking place that went beyond simple fight-or-flight responses. Slowly, the wolf lifted its head slightly and tested the air with its sensitive nose. Michael realized the animal was memorizing his scent, cataloging this particular human signature for future reference. The thought was both thrilling and sobering. He was being evaluated by one of nature's most sophisticated predators, and somehow found worthy of observation rather than immediate avoidance. The alpha took a single step forward, then stopped. The movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial, like a formal acknowledgement of Michael's presence. Then, with fluid grace that made no sound on the packed snow, the wolf turned and disappeared into the forest. One moment it was there, solid and undeniably real. The next it had melted into the shadows between the trees as if it had never existed. Michael remained frozen in position for several more minutes, processing what had just occurred. In 3 years of patrolling these mountains, he had glimpsed wolves at distances or found evidence of their passage, but never experienced such a direct, sustained encounter. The meeting felt significant beyond its simple facts. A boundary had been crossed, though he couldn't yet articulate what that boundary represented. When he finally moved to examine the spot where the wolf had stood, Michael found the tracks embedded clearly in the snow. The alpha's prints were substantially larger than those of the injured pack member, with displayed toes and claw marks that indicated a mature male in excellent physical condition. The animal had approached to within easy charging distance, close enough to attack if it had perceived Michael as a threat to its pack or territory. But there had been no aggression in the encounter, only careful assessment. Michael wondered if the alpha was somehow aware of his recent intervention with the trapped pack member. Wolves possessed sophisticated communication abilities and strong social bonds. It was entirely possible that his actions 3 days earlier had been observed and reported within the pack's hierarchy. The thought led to broader questions about how wild animals perceived human intentions. Michael had always approached his work with respect for the intelligence of forest creatures, but this encounter suggested levels of awareness he had never fully appreciated. The wolf had evaluated him as an individual, not simply reacted to his presence as a human threat. As he continued following the trail, Michael noticed subtle changes in the pack's travel patterns. Where previously the wolves had moved directly through obvious corridors, their recent tracks showed more circuitous routes that avoided certain areas entirely. They were learning to navigate around potential dangers, modifying ancient travel patterns based on new information about trap locations. The realization brought both satisfaction and concern. His efforts to locate and disable abandoned traps were apparently being noticed by the very animals he was trying to protect. But if the wolves were changing their traditional routes, they might be venturing into unfamiliar territory where other hazards existed. Michael reached into his pack and withdrew several thin branches he had prepared that morning. Frank Kowalski had mentioned that old-time woodsmen sometimes left subtle markers to communicate with each other. Broken twigs arranged in specific patterns, small cairns of stones, blazes cut into tree bark. If wolves were intelligent enough to recognize individual humans, perhaps they could learn to interpret simple warning signals. At a location where the wolf trail approached a creek crossing, Michael found what he was looking for: a natural bottleneck where animals would be forced to step in predictable spots. The area showed no signs of traps, but its configuration was ideal for the placement of snares or leg holds. Someone familiar with trapping techniques would inevitably choose this location. Michael selected 2 saplings flanking the trail and carefully broke them at chest height, leaving the broken ends pointing downward toward the snow. The arrangement was artificial enough to catch attention, but natural enough to avoid alarming the animals. Between the saplings, he placed a small pile of stones in a triangular pattern, another obviously human-made marker. The warning system was experimental, based more on intuition than scientific knowledge of wolf behavior. But Michael reasoned that animals intelligent enough to modify their travel routes in response to trap discoveries might also learn to associate human markers with potential dangers. If the pack encountered his warnings and found them consistently reliable, they might begin actively searching for such indicators. Over the following hours, Michael established similar markers at 3 more locations where terrain features suggested probable trap sites. Each marker was photographed and logged with GPS coordinates, creating a systematic record of his communication attempts. The work felt simultaneously logical and absurd. A government employee trying to develop a primitive sign language with wild predators. Late afternoon light was slanting through the forest canopy when Michael encountered the wolves again. This time, the entire pack was visible across a small meadow, perhaps 200 yards distant. They moved with the coordinated purpose of a successful hunting group, their dark forms contrasting sharply against the snow-covered clearing. The alpha male led the formation, followed by what appeared to be his mate and the 3 younger animals. The injured wolf traveled third in line, still showing signs of its trap encounter, but keeping pace without obvious difficulty. The pack's body language suggested alertness rather than alarm. They were aware of Michael's presence, but not threatened by it. As Michael watched through his binoculars, the alpha stopped and looked directly toward his position. The distance was too great for detailed facial features, but the wolf's posture conveyed unmistakable recognition. This was not a chance sighting. The animal knew exactly where Michael was located and had chosen to acknowledge his presence once again. The moment lasted perhaps 30 seconds before the pack resumed movement across the meadow. But something fundamental had shifted in Michael's understanding of his role in this wilderness ecosystem. He was no longer simply an observer documenting wildlife behavior. He had become a recognized participant in the complex social dynamics of a wolf pack's territory. The implications were both exciting and sobering. If the wolves were learning to associate his presence with safety rather than danger, Michael bore new responsibilities for their welfare. His actions would influence not only individual animals, but potentially the survival strategies of entire family groups. The experimental warning markers represented the beginning of an unprecedented communication system between species. As darkness approached, Michael began his return hike to the ranger station. The day's experiences had challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between humans and wildlife. Traditional conservation philosophy emphasized minimal human interference with natural processes, but the reality of abandoned traps and other human-caused hazards demanded more active intervention. The wolf pack's apparent willingness to coexist with his presence suggested possibilities Michael had never considered. Instead of being invisible guardians of wilderness areas, perhaps rangers could develop more collaborative relationships with the animals they were charged to protect. The concept was radical enough to face institutional resistance, but the afternoon's observations provided compelling evidence for its potential effectiveness. Back at his truck, Michael uploaded the day's photographs and GPS data to his laptop. The images of wolf tracks and experimental markers would form part of an ongoing documentation project, though he had not yet decided how much of his work to include in official reports. Some experiments were better conducted quietly until their results could justify the methods. The drive back to town took place in gathering twilight, headlights cutting through falling snow that would erase the day's tracks by morning. But Michael knew that more permanent changes were taking place in the wilderness he patrolled. Boundaries were shifting, new forms of communication were emerging, and ancient relationships between predator and protector were being redefined. The injured wolf's recovery and the alpha's repeated acknowledgement suggested that trust could develop between species previously separated by mutual fear and misunderstanding. If that trust could be systematically cultivated and expanded, the implications for wildlife management were profound. Michael's radio crackled with routine check-in calls from other rangers, but he found himself reluctant to break the contemplative silence that had followed his wilderness encounters. Some experiences required careful processing before they could be translated into words and official reports. Tonight would be devoted to reflection and planning, preparing for tomorrow's continuation of an experiment whose ultimate outcomes remained tantalizingly uncertain. The snow continued falling as he reached the ranger station, covering the mountains in fresh white that would provide perfect tracking conditions for tomorrow's work. Somewhere up there, a pack of wolves was settling into their evening routine, perhaps discussing in their own language the strange human who left broken sticks and piles of stones in their territory. Michael's study of wolf behavior began at dawn with systematic observation of their movement patterns. Armed with detailed topographical maps and a notebook filled with GPS coordinates from previous encounters, he set out to understand the logic behind pack travel routes through the Cascade Wilderness. Snow conditions were perfect. A light overnight dusting had covered older tracks without completely obscuring them, creating a palimpsest of wildlife activity spanning several days. The wolves' primary corridor followed Quarry Ridge for approximately 3 miles before descending into the valley through a series of natural terraces. Michael had identified this route during previous patrols, but now he studied it with the focused attention of someone trying to decode an ancient language. Each track cluster told part of a larger story about pack hierarchy, hunting strategies, and territorial boundaries. At the first major trail junction, where three game paths converged near a frozen spring, Michael discovered something that stopped him cold. His experimental warning markers from the previous week had been disturbed. The carefully arranged stones lay scattered, but not randomly. They formed a loose line pointing toward a thick stand of lodgepole pines approximately 50 yards from the trail. Michael approached the indicated area with growing excitement and apprehension. Hidden beneath low-hanging branches, exactly where the stones seemed to point, he found a rusted leg-hold trap anchored to a buried log. The device was old and partially frozen, but its spring mechanism remained functional enough to maim any animal unlucky enough to step on its trigger plate. The implications sent a chill through Michael that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. Somehow, the wolves had not only recognized his warning markers as human-made objects, but had correctly interpreted their significance and investigative purpose. The scattered stones represented a response, a form of communication that bridged the gap between species with stunning sophistication. Michael photographed the trap and markers from multiple angles before carefully disabling the device. His hands shook slightly as he worked, not from cold, but from the magnitude of what appeared to be happening. If wolves were actively helping locate dangerous traps, the collaborative potential for wilderness safety had expanded far beyond his most optimistic projections. The scientific part of his mind demanded caution in drawing conclusions from a single incident. The stone displacement could have been caused by deer, elk, or even small mammals investigating novel objects in their territory. But the precise directional arrangement and the trap's location seemed too coincidental for random explanation. Michael established new warning markers at 2 additional locations along the wolf pack's primary travel route. This time, he used a more sophisticated system, arrangements of broken branches that formed arrow-like patterns pointing toward areas where trap placement was most probable. Each marker was documented with precise GPS coordinates and detailed photographs showing its original configuration. The experimental communication system required careful calibration to avoid conditioning wolves to seek out human-made objects. Michael's goal was to create associations between specific marker types and genuine dangers, not to encourage general curiosity about human artifacts. The markers needed to be distinctive enough for recognition, but simple enough for reliable interpretation. At Pine Creek Crossing, where the pack's trail descended toward winter feeding areas, Michael found evidence of recent trap activity. Fresh tool marks on several trees indicated someone had been working in the area within the past month. Boot prints in partially melted snow showed a distinctive sole pattern that differed from any footwear worn by local rangers or wildlife officials. The discovery was deeply troubling. Most abandoned traps dated from the 1990s or earlier, before federal protection was established for this wilderness area. Fresh activity suggested current illegal trapping, possibly targeting wolves specifically now that pack populations were recovering throughout the region. Michael photographed the evidence and marked the location for follow-up investigation by law enforcement rangers. Continuing his patrol, Michael began noticing subtle changes in recent wolf movement patterns. Where previous tracks had shown direct travel through obvious corridors, newer signs indicated more circuitous routes that seemed to avoid specific locations entirely. The pack was learning to navigate around areas they had identified as potentially dangerous. The behavioral adaptation was exactly what Michael had hoped to encourage, but seeing it in practice raised new questions about the long-term consequences. If wolves abandoned traditional travel routes to avoid human-associated dangers, They might be forced into less suitable habitat or conflict with neighboring packs, defending adjacent territories. Conservation efforts that saved individual animals could potentially disrupt broader ecosystem dynamics. Michael's contemplation of these complexities was interrupted by movement in his peripheral vision. 30 yards to his left, partially concealed behind a cluster of snow-covered boulders, the alpha male wolf stood watching his progress. The animal's posture showed neither aggression nor fear, simply alert interest in the human's activities. This third direct encounter felt different from the previous meetings. The wolf seemed more relaxed, as if Michael's presence was becoming a familiar and non-threatening element of its territorial landscape. When Michael stopped to observe the animal, the wolf actually took several steps closer, reducing the distance between them to perhaps 20 yards. The alpha's behavior suggested a level of trust that Michael found simultaneously thrilling and sobering. Wild wolves that lost their natural wariness of humans often face tragic consequences from less benevolent human encounters. But in this remote wilderness setting, the developing relationship might represent something unprecedented in wildlife management. Genuine collaboration between species for mutual benefit. Michael remained motionless while the wolf conducted its own assessment of the situation. The animal's gaze shifted between Michael's face and the warning markers he had been establishing along the trail. There seemed to be recognition in those amber eyes, an understanding that the human's activities were somehow connected to pack safety. After several minutes of mutual observation, the alpha wolf deliberately walked toward one of Michael's marker sites. The animal sniffed carefully at the arranged branches, then looked back at Michael as if seeking confirmation of their significance. The behavior was so clearly communicative that Michael felt compelled to respond in some way. Moving slowly to avoid startling the wolf, Michael approached his own marker and pointed toward a nearby area where terrain features suggested probable trap placement. The gesture felt absurd, attempting to communicate hunting dangers to a predator whose ancestors had avoided human traps for centuries. But the wolf's attention remained focused on Michael's movements with unmistakable intelligence. The alpha followed Michael's pointing gesture with its gaze, then began investigating the indicated area. Within minutes, the wolf had located something hidden beneath a fallen log, another rusty trap. This one a conibear body trap positioned perfectly to catch any animal following the natural travel corridor. Michael could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The wolf had not only understood his directional indication, but had successfully identified a dangerous trap based on that guidance. The level of interspecies communication was unprecedented in his experience and possibly in scientific literature. The alpha wolf looked back at Michael, then deliberately pushed several small stones with its nose, arranging them in a rough line, pointing toward the hidden trap. The gesture mirrored Michael's own marker system with stunning accuracy. The animal was not merely responding to human signals, but actively participating in the development of shared warning language. Michael disabled the conibear trap while the wolf watched from a safe distance. The device had been set decades earlier, probably forgotten during the transition from legal to illegal trapping in the area. Its discovery represented another potentially life-saving success for the experimental collaboration. When Michael finished documenting the trap location, he found the alpha wolf still observing his work. The animal's body language conveyed neither dominance nor submission, but something closer to partnership. They were becoming allies in a shared effort to make the wilderness safer for its wild inhabitants. The implications extended far beyond individual trap removal. If wolves could learn to recognize and communicate about human-caused dangers, they might develop similar responses to other hazards, illegal hunting blinds, poison bait stations, or unauthorized vehicle traffic. The experimental warning system could evolve into a comprehensive safety network spanning thousands of acres of wilderness. Michael's radio crackled with a routine check-in call from the ranger station, breaking the spell of interspecies communication. The alpha wolf immediately melted back into the forest shadows, disappearing with the fluid grace that made such animals seem like embodiments of the wilderness itself. But the memory of shared purpose lingered in the crisp mountain air. As Michael hiked back toward his vehicle, he reflected on the morning's extraordinary developments. Traditional wildlife management emphasized maintaining barriers between humans and wild animals, but his experiences suggested that carefully managed cooperation could achieve conservation goals more effectively than rigid separation. The challenge would be documenting and validating these interactions without exposing the wolf pack to unwanted attention from researchers, photographers, or thrill seekers. Some discoveries required protection from the very scientific community that might benefit most from understanding them. Michael's daily report would include the trap removals and GPS coordinates, but the details of wolf communication would remain in his private journal until he could better understand the implications. Some experiments demanded time to develop before they could withstand the scrutiny of institutional evaluation. The snow had stopped falling by the time Michael reached his truck, leaving the forest in crystalline stillness that seemed to hold its breath for whatever developments might emerge from this unprecedented collaboration. Somewhere in those pristine mountains, a pack of wolves was learning to work with a human partner, redefining ancient relationships between predator and protector in ways that could transform wilderness conservation. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to expand and refine their shared language of safety, building trust that might ultimately benefit countless wild creatures navigating an increasingly dangerous world. The distress calls reached Michael from nearly half a mile away, carried on the still morning air like broken music. High-pitched yelps punctuated by deeper, more urgent barks created a cacophony that spoke of genuine terror rather than normal pack communication. He abandoned his planned route along Beaver Creek and snowshoed rapidly toward the sound, his emergency kit bouncing against his back with each hurried step. The temperature had dropped to 8 degrees Fahrenheit overnight, creating a crust on the snow that supported his weight while muffling his approach. Michael followed the increasingly frantic calls through a maze of deadfall and thick underbrush, pushing through areas where no established trails existed. The urgency in those animal voices drove him forward despite the difficult terrain. 20 minutes of hard travel brought him to a small clearing where the drama was unfolding. A wolf pup, probably 6 months old and still showing the gangly proportions of youth, lay trapped beneath 2 feet of snow that had concealed a leg-hold trap. Only the animal's head and one front paw remained visible above the surface, the rest of its body held fast by steel jaws hidden in the white depths. The pup's struggles had packed the snow around its trapped limb into an icy prison, making escape impossible even if the trap mechanism could be triggered. Each movement only drove the steel teeth deeper into its leg and exhausted the young animal further. Blood stained the snow in a widening circle around the trap site, dark red against pristine white. But Michael's attention was immediately captured by the scene surrounding the trapped pup. 4 adult wolves maintained a vigilant perimeter at distances ranging from 30 to 50 yards, their eyes fixed alternately on their trapped pack member and the approaching human. The alpha male stood closest, his massive frame tense with protective instincts, but showing none of the aggressive posturing Michael might have expected from a corner predator defending its young. The alpha female paced restlessly behind a fallen log, occasionally releasing low whines that seemed intended to comfort the trapped pup. 2 subordinate adults, likely older siblings or aunts, completed the circle, their body language indicating extreme stress but remarkable restraint. Any one of these wolves could have attacked Michael as he approached their vulnerable pack member, yet they maintained their positions and watched his movements with intense but non-aggressive attention. Michael understood intuitively that he was witnessing something unprecedented. The pack had apparently decided that his presence represented hope rather than additional danger. Their behavior suggested not only recognition of his previous interventions, but active faith in his ability to help their trapped youngster. The implications were both thrilling and terrifying. If Michael failed to free the pup, or if his rescue attempt resulted in serious injury to the young wolf, the carefully developed trust between human and pack could be shattered permanently. The adult's restraint was conditional on his success. Failure could trigger defensive attacks that would endanger both him and the trapped animal. Michael approached the pup slowly, speaking in low, calming tones while assessing the situation. The young wolf's eyes tracked his movement but showed exhaustion rather than fear. The animal had been struggling against the trap for hours, possibly since early morning, and its strength was clearly failing. The trap mechanism lay buried beneath 18 inches of packed snow that had been compressed by the pup's frantic attempts to escape. Michael would need to excavate carefully around the device without causing additional injury to the already traumatized leg. The work would require patience and precision, while 4 adult wolves watched his every movement from increasingly close distances. Michael knelt in the blood-stained snow and began the delicate excavation process. Using his hands and a small folding shovel, he removed snow and ice from around the trapped limb with archaeological care. The pup remained remarkably still during this process, as if understanding that cooperation would improve its chances of survival. The steel trap revealed itself gradually as Michael cleared away the concealing snow. It was another old Bridger model, similar to the device that had caught the adult wolf several weeks earlier. The jaws had closed on the pup's right rear leg, just above the ankle, deep enough to cause significant bleeding, but apparently missing major bones and arteries. As Michael worked to expose the trap mechanism, he became aware that the adult wolves had moved closer. The alpha male now stood less than 20 feet away, close enough for Michael to see the intelligent assessment in those yellow eyes. The animal's body language remained non-threatening, but the proximity was clearly intended to monitor the rescue attempt and intervene if necessary. The alpha female had approached from the opposite direction, positioning herself where she could see both Michael's work and her trapped offspring. Her soft whining had become almost constant, a running commentary of encouragement directed toward the injured pup. The other 2 adults maintained wider perimeters, but had also moved significantly closer to the action. Michael felt the weight of their attention as he prepared to trigger the trap mechanism. Success would strengthen the unprecedented partnership developing between human and pack. Failure could result in the pup's death and the permanent loss of wolf trust that had taken weeks to establish. With one hand steadying the trap frame and the other compressing the spring mechanism, Michael applied pressure to the release points. The device opened with a metallic snap that seemed unnaturally loud in the winter silence. The pup immediately pulled its injured leg free, but instead of fleeing, the young wolf remained lying in the snow, too exhausted to move. The reaction from the adult pack members was immediate and extraordinary. The alpha female approached within 10 feet of Michael and began licking her offspring's face and injured leg, completely ignoring the human presence. The alpha male moved even closer, investigating the now disabled trap with obvious interest before turning his attention to Michael with what could only be described as gratitude. For several minutes, The clearing became a scene of joyful reunion as the adult wolves surrounded their rescued pack member with encouraging whines and gentle nuzzling. Michael remained kneeling in the blood-stained snow, feeling simultaneously invisible and deeply included in this intimate family moment. The injured pup gradually regained enough strength to stand, though it favored the trapped leg heavily. The wound was serious, but not crippling. With time and care, the young wolf would likely recover full mobility. But the immediate challenge was getting the weakened animal back to the pack's denning area, where it could rest and heal properly. Michael watched in fascination as the adult wolves organized their rescue logistics. The alpha male took position ahead of the group, testing the safest route through the deep snow. The female remained beside the injured pup, offering physical support when it stumbled. The two subordinate adults flanked the formation, providing security for the vulnerable procession. But instead of immediately departing, the alpha male approached Michael once more. The wolf stopped just 6 feet away and engaged in what could only be described as direct communication. Those amber eyes held Michael's gaze for several seconds, conveying recognition, gratitude, and something approaching friendship between species. Then the alpha did something that Michael would remember for the rest of his life. The massive wolf lowered its head in what appeared to be a brief bow, a gesture of acknowledgement that transcended the boundaries between human and wild animal. When the wolf lifted its head again, Michael found himself nodding in response, completing an exchange that needed no words to convey its meaning. The pack's departure was organized and dignified despite the injured pup's limitations. Michael watched them disappear into the forest shadows, moving slowly to accommodate their wounded member but maintaining the coordinated purpose that made wolves such effective survivors. Left alone in the clearing, Michael examined the disabled trap and the churned snow that told the story of the morning's drama. The device joined a growing collection of evidence that illegal trapping continued despite federal prohibitions. But more importantly, the rescue had demonstrated the remarkable level of trust that was developing between his conservation efforts and the wolf pack survival strategies. The implications extended far beyond a single rescue operation. The adult wolf's behavior had shown sophisticated understanding of human capabilities and intentions. They had recognized Michael as a potential ally rather than a threat, and had actively facilitated his rescue efforts by maintaining protective perimeters without interfering with his work. Michael documented the trap location and photographed the rescue site from multiple angles. His official report would focus on the illegal trapping evidence and the successful wildlife intervention. But his private journal would record the extraordinary details of interspecies cooperation that had made the rescue possible. As he snowshoed back toward his vehicle, Michael reflected on the morning's events and their broader significance for wildlife management philosophy. Traditional approaches emphasized maintaining separation between humans and wild animals, based on assumptions that human contact inevitably corrupted natural behaviors. But his experiences with the wolf pack suggested that carefully managed relationships could actually enhance wildlife survival in landscapes increasingly impacted by human activities. The wolves were learning to work with rather than against human presence, developing collaborative strategies that benefited both species. The challenge would be protecting this developing partnership from well-meaning but potentially disruptive attention. Scientists studying wolf behavior might demand research access that could destroy the delicate trust that had taken weeks to establish. Wildlife photographers seeking dramatic images could scatter the pack or condition them to expect rewards from human encounters. Michael's radio crackled with routine communications from other rangers, but he found himself reluctant to break the contemplative silence that followed such an extraordinary morning. Some experiences required careful processing before they could be shared with colleagues who might not understand the subtleties involved in interspecies communication. The sun had climbed high enough to begin softening the snow's surface when Michael reached his truck. Somewhere in the wilderness behind him, a wounded wolf pup was receiving care from its pack mates while adult wolves incorporated new understanding about human allies into their survival strategies. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to expand and refine their collaborative relationship, building on the foundation of trust established through shared concern for young lives endangered by human carelessness. The experimental partnership was evolving beyond simple trap removal towards something resembling genuine friendship between natural enemies. Michael's daily report would document another successful trap removal and wildlife rescue. But the real significance of the morning's work lay in relationships that couldn't be quantified in bureaucratic summaries. Trust, once established between species, opened possibilities that traditional conservation approaches had never imagined. The forest had accepted him as more than an observer or protector. He was becoming a participant in the complex social dynamics that govern survival in the wilderness. The responsibility was both humbling and inspiring, suggesting new directions for human relationships with the natural world. The systematic development of warning signals began during the second week of February, when Michael established what he privately termed training stations throughout the pack's territory. Each station consisted of carefully arranged natural materials, broken branches, stone cairns, and scraped earth patterns, positioned near locations where terrain features suggested probable trap placement. The methodology was experimental and admittedly unscientific, based more on intuition than established wildlife management protocols. Michael reasoned that if wolves possessed the intelligence to recognize individual humans and remember beneficial interactions, they might also learn to interpret consistently applied visual signals that indicated potential dangers. The first station was positioned at Deadwood Creek Crossing, where a natural funnel between two ridges created an ideal trap site. Michael arranged 3 broken saplings in a triangular pattern, each pointing toward a different area where leg hold or body traps might be concealed. Between the saplings, he placed a small cairn of distinctive white stones that contrasted sharply with the surrounding granite and pine debris. 24 hours later, Michael returned to find the station had been investigated. Wolf tracks circled the warning markers, and the white stones had been deliberately scattered in 3 different directions. Following the indicated paths, Michael discovered 2 ancient conibeer traps and a rusty leg-hold device, all positioned exactly where the scattered stones seemed to point. The implications sent excitement racing through Michael's professional skepticism. Either the wolves had understood his warning system and located the hidden traps, or an extraordinary series of coincidences had occurred. Scientific caution demanded more evidence before drawing definitive conclusions, but the precision of the stone placement suggested intentional communication rather than random investigation. Michael established the second training station at Pine Ridge Overlook, using a different configuration to test whether the wolves could generalize from specific markers to broader pattern recognition. This time he created arrow-like arrangements using fallen branches, all pointing toward a cluster of trees where trap placement seemed most probable. The results were equally remarkable. Within 36 hours, the branch arrows had been disturbed and rearranged to point toward 4 separate locations. Investigation revealed trap sites at 3 of the indicated spots, including a snare trap that would have been virtually impossible to locate without specific directional guidance. By the end of February, Michael had established 7 training stations throughout the pack's territory. Each location showed evidence of careful wolf investigation, and the accuracy of their trap identification exceeded 90%. The animals were not only learning to interpret his warning signals, but were becoming active partners in the systematic removal of dangerous devices. The collaborative relationship extended beyond simple trap detection. Michael began noticing that the wolves were modifying their own territorial markings to incorporate elements of his warning system. Tree scratches and scent posts now included small stone arrangements that seemed to indicate safe travel corridors versus potentially dangerous areas. The alpha male had become particularly sophisticated in his communication attempts. During their encounters, the wolf would often lead Michael towards specific locations, then use deliberate body language to indicate areas requiring investigation. The animal's behavior showed clear intent to direct human attention toward potential hazards. One memorable morning, the alpha approached Michael's position and began an elaborate display that resembled nothing so much as a wildlife version of charades. The wolf would walk toward a particular tree, then return and make eye contact with Michael, repeating the sequence until the human followed. Hidden in the tree's root system was a carefully camouflaged snare trap that would have been nearly impossible to detect without specific guidance. The developing partnership required constant calibration to avoid creating dependencies that might prove dangerous for the wolves. Michael was careful to vary his patrol schedules and training station locations, ensuring that the pack maintained their natural wariness while learning to utilize human assistance as one resource among many survival strategies. The challenge was intensified by the need to prevent other humans from discovering the collaborative relationship. Local hunters and trappers would likely view trained wolves as either a threat to their activities or an opportunity for exploitation. Wildlife researchers might insist on studying the phenomenon in ways that could destroy the delicate trust that had taken months to establish. Michael's documentation became increasingly detailed, but also more carefully coded. His official reports recorded trap removals and GPS coordinates without mentioning wolf cooperation. His private journals contained the full story of interspecies collaboration, protected by personal encryption and stored in locations where bureaucratic oversight couldn't access them. The scientific implications were staggering. If wolves could learn to work with humans in trap detection, they might be trained to assist with other conservation challenges, illegal hunting, habitat destruction, or invasive species management. The potential for human-wildlife partnerships in ecosystem protection had barely been explored by traditional research approaches. But Michael was also acutely aware of the ethical complexities involved in his experiments. Was it appropriate to condition wild animals to trust human signals, given the broader context of human-wildlife conflict throughout their range? If these wolves encountered less benevolent humans, their learned trust could prove fatal rather than beneficial. The answer came during a late February snowstorm when Michael discovered the alpha female caught in a trap he had somehow missed during his systematic searches. The device had been expertly concealed beneath a fallen log, positioned along a secondary trail that the pack used only occasionally. Michael's approach to the trapped wolf was complicated by the presence of the entire pack, including the previously injured pup whose leg had healed remarkably well. All 5 animals maintained close positions around their trapped leader, but their body language showed anxiety rather than aggression. They had learned to associate Michael's presence with rescue rather than danger. The alpha female's trap was more complex than previous devices, requiring careful coordination between Michael's mechanical skills and the pack's understanding of the situation. As he worked to disable the mechanism, the other wolves provided lookout duty and emotional support for their trapped leader, creating a collaborative rescue effort that transcended species boundaries. When the trap finally released, the alpha female's first action was to approach Michael directly. She touched his extended hand with her nose, the first physical contact he had experienced with any of the pack members. The gesture conveyed trust that had moved beyond caution towards something resembling friendship. The rescue strengthened Michael's conviction that their partnership was ethically justified despite its unconventional nature. These wolves faced genuine dangers from human activities, and traditional conservation approaches had proven inadequate to address the scope of illegal trapping in the region. Collaborative relationships offered practical solutions that protected wildlife while respecting their intelligence and autonomy. March brought warmer weather and increased wolf activity as the pack prepared for spring territorial adjustments and potential breeding activities. Michael's training stations required constant maintenance as snow melted and revealed new trap sites that had been hidden throughout the winter months. The wolves' learning curve continued to impress him with its sophistication. They had begun creating their own warning markers using techniques borrowed from his system but adapted to wolf-specific needs. Small stone piles appeared along travel routes, positioned to warn pack members about areas that required careful investigation. The alpha pair had also started bringing other pack members to training stations, apparently teaching the collaborative techniques to younger animals. Michael observed several sessions where adult wolves demonstrated proper investigation procedures for newly discovered warning markers, treating the lesson as seriously as hunting instruction or territorial patrol duties. The educational process suggested that knowledge of human partnership was becoming integrated into the pack's cultural transmission systems. Young wolves were learning to work with beneficial humans as part of their broader wilderness survival curriculum. The implications for long-term wildlife management were revolutionary. Michael's monthly report to the regional supervisor documented the removal of 43 illegal traps during the winter season, a success rate that exceeded expectations for a single ranger working alone. The report credited systematic search techniques and improved knowledge of historical trap locations, mentioning collaborative wolf assistance only indirectly through references to enhanced wildlife observations. But privately, Michael understood that his most significant accomplishment was not trap removal, but relationship building. The partnership with the wolf pack had demonstrated possibilities for human-wildlife cooperation that challenged fundamental assumptions about conservation philosophy and practice. The spring season would bring new challenges as increased human activity in the wilderness complicated the collaborative relationship. Hikers, photographers, and seasonal researchers would soon return to areas that had been isolated during winter months. Protecting the wolf pack from unwanted attention would require careful management of their newly developed trust in human interactions. Michael had already begun developing protocols for maintaining the partnership while minimizing its visibility to other humans. The training stations would need to be more carefully camouflaged, and meetings with the pack would require strategic timing to avoid accidental observation by visitors to the area. The experimental collaboration had succeeded beyond his most optimistic projections, but success brought new responsibilities for protecting the animals who had placed their trust in human partnership. The challenges ahead would test not only the durability of their relationship, but also Michael's ability to shield it from forces that might not understand its value. Spring was coming to the Cascade Mountains, and with it would come the real test of whether trust established in winter isolation could survive the complexities of a world where not all humans shared Michael's commitment to wildlife welfare. The spring thaw had transformed the landscape into a maze of rushing streams and muddy paths when Michael encountered the pack at the edge of Bear Creek Ravine. The wolves stood on the northern rim while he approached from the south, the gap between them bridged by nothing more than rushing snowmelt 40 feet below. What happened next would remain etched in his memory as the moment when cooperation truly became partnership. The alpha male appeared first, emerging from a stand of budding aspens to survey the ravine crossing. The animal's posture showed none of the cautious assessment that had characterized their earlier encounters. Instead, the wolf carried himself with the confidence of someone meeting a trusted colleague for a planned expedition. Michael stopped at his side of the ravine and studied the terrain below. Recent snowmelt had turned Bear Creek into a torrent that would be dangerous for both humans and animals to cross. The usual fording points were completely submerged, and the banks had become treacherous slopes of loose mud and unstable rocks. As Michael considered the crossing challenge, more wolves appeared on the opposite rim. The alpha female took position beside her mate, followed by the three younger pack members, including the pup, whose leg had healed remarkably well from its trap injury. All five animals focused their attention across the ravine toward Michael, but their body language suggested expectation rather than mere curiosity. The alpha male began moving east along the northern rim, pausing frequently to look back at Michael as if inviting him to follow. The intention was unmistakable. The wolf was suggesting a coordinated journey along parallel routes that would allow both human and pack to navigate the challenging terrain safely. Michael accepted the invitation and began hiking eastward along the southern rim, matching the pack's pace and direction. The experience felt surreal. A government employee and a family of wild predators conducting a joint expedition through wilderness territory, separated by geography, but united in purpose. The wolves' choice of route demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both human capabilities and the hazards posed by the swollen creek. They avoided areas where loose rock might create avalanche dangers for a bipedal traveler, and they paused at locations where Michael could rest and assess the terrain ahead. Their consideration for his limitations as a land mammal showed remarkable empathy across species boundaries. 20 minutes into their parallel journey, the alpha female discovered something that brought the entire procession to a halt. She began circling beneath a large pine tree, nose to the ground, then looked across the ravine toward Michael and released a series of low barks that clearly carried warning significance. Michael studied the area she was investigating and noticed the telltale signs of human disturbance. Broken branches at unnatural angles, scraped earth, and the rectangular depression that indicated buried objects. Even from 40 feet away, he could recognize the signature of trap placement by someone familiar with wolf behavior patterns. The challenge was communicating across the ravine gap to coordinate trap investigation. Michael had developed hand signals for close-range work with the pack, but the distance and terrain made such gestures difficult to interpret. The wolves had learned to associate his presence with trap removal, but they couldn't direct him to specific locations from their current position. The alpha male solved the communication problem with typical wolf ingenuity. He began collecting stones from the creek bed and arranging them in arrow patterns that pointed toward the suspected trap site. The stone arrows were large enough to be visible from Michael's position across the ravine, providing directional guidance despite the physical separation. Following the wolves' stone indicators, Michael identified the approximate location on his side of the ravine where similar trap placement would be logical. His investigation revealed not one, but 3 concealed devices, 2 leg-hold traps, and a snare cable positioned to intercept animals following the natural contours around the ravine. As Michael disabled each trap, the wolves maintained their observation posts and continued refining their directional signals. When he moved too far from a concealed device, they would rearrange stones to redirect his search. When he located a trap successfully, they would scatter the marker stones and begin creating new indicators for the next hidden danger. The collaborative trap removal process took most of the morning, but its success was measured in more than mechanical achievements. Michael and the pack had developed a communication system that functioned effectively across significant distances and terrain barriers. They were learning to work together as a coordinated team rather than simply tolerating each other's presence. The breakthrough came when they reached a location where the ravine narrowed to perhaps 20 feet. A fallen log provided a precarious bridge between the two rims, though crossing would require careful balance and considerable courage from either human or wolf. The alpha female approached the log bridge and tested its stability with characteristic caution. The timber held her weight, but shifting slightly under pressure in ways that made crossing hazardous. She retreated and began pacing along the rim, clearly frustrated by the barrier that prevented direct collaboration with their human partner. Michael faced the same dilemma from his side of the ravine. The log bridge would support his weight, but a fall into the rushing creek below could prove fatal. Traditional ranger safety protocols prohibited such risks, especially when working alone without radio contact to summon rescue assistance. But the alpha male was already moving onto the log, demonstrating a level of trust that transcended normal wolf caution about unstable surfaces. The massive animal proceeded slowly but steadily across the makeshift bridge, pausing only to maintain balance when the log shifted under his weight. Reaching Michael's side of the ravine, the alpha immediately began investigating areas that had been indicated by the pack's stone signals. His nose quickly located 2 additional traps that Michael had missed during his initial search, devices so expertly concealed that only a predator's superior senses could detect them. The wolves crossing had transformed their collaboration from long-distance coordination to direct partnership. As Michael worked to disable the newly discovered traps, the alpha provided close-range guidance that dramatically improved search efficiency. The animal could pinpoint exact trap locations within inches, allowing Michael to focus his efforts precisely rather than conducting broad area sweeps. The success of their joint operation encouraged the alpha female to attempt the log crossing as well. She moved with even greater caution than her mate, but her determination was evident in every careful step across the swaying timber. Her arrival on Michael's side of the ravine completed the pack's commitment to direct collaboration despite the obvious risks involved. Working together on the same side of the ravine, Michael and the 2 adult wolves developed an efficient system for comprehensive trap detection. The wolves would identify concealed devices through scent and sound, then use body language to guide Michael to exact locations. Their combined efforts revealed 8 additional traps in areas that would have taken Michael days to search thoroughly working alone. The younger pack members maintained security positions on the opposite rim, serving as lookouts for potential human intrusion while their parents collaborated directly with Michael. Their disciplined behavior suggested that the entire pack understood both the importance and the vulnerability of their partnership with the human ranger. By late afternoon, they had cleared the entire Bear Creek area of illegal trapping devices. The success was measured not only in traps removed, but in the seamless coordination they had achieved between human technology and wolf senses. Each species contributed unique capabilities to their shared conservation goals. The return journey posed new challenges as the wolves needed to cross back to their home territory on the northern rim. The log bridge had become increasingly unstable throughout the day, settling deeper into the soft earth and developing an alarming tendency to roll when weight was applied. Michael solved the crossing problem by positioning himself as a counterbalance while each wolf traversed the log. His weight on one end helped stabilize the bridge while the animals crossed, though the arrangement required precise timing and coordination to avoid disaster for either participant. The successful completion of their joint expedition was celebrated in the understated way that had become characteristic of human-wolf interactions. The alpha pair touched Michael's hands with their noses before crossing back to join their offspring, while he nodded acknowledgement of their partnership and mutual respect. As the pack disappeared into the evening shadows on the northern rim, Michael reflected on the day's extraordinary developments. They had moved beyond simple cooperation towards something resembling genuine friendship between traditional enemies. The wolves' willingness to risk dangerous creek crossings demonstrated trust that transcended normal survival instincts. The implications for wildlife management philosophy were profound. If predators could learn to work directly with humans in conservation efforts, traditional approaches based on species separation might prove unnecessarily limited. The collaborative model suggested possibilities for addressing environmental challenges through partnerships rather than human-imposed solutions. Michael's documentation of the day's trap removal would focus on the mechanical aspects of device location and disposal. But his private records would preserve the details of interspecies cooperation that had made such comprehensive success possible. Some achievements required protection from institutional scrutiny until their value could be properly understood. The spring evening was settling over the Cascade Mountains as Michael hiked back toward his vehicle. Somewhere across the ravine, a pack of wolves was returning to their denning area with new knowledge about human partnership and its potential for mutual benefit. Tomorrow would bring fresh opportunities to expand their collaborative relationship and explore its implications for wilderness conservation. The experimental partnership had evolved beyond his most optimistic projections, suggesting that trust between species could overcome barriers that seemed insurmountable from traditional perspectives. The challenge ahead was protecting and nurturing that trust while demonstrating its practical value for wildlife protection in an increasingly complex world. The emergency began with the sharp crack of breaking ice echoing across the valley like a gunshot. Michael was examining a trap site near Willow Creek when the sound reached him, followed immediately by the desperate yelping of a young animal in mortal danger. The high-pitched cries carried notes of panic that transcended species, the universal language of a creature facing death. Michael abandoned his equipment and ran toward the sound, crashing through brush and deadfall with abandon. The creek had been running high for 3 days, fed by unseasonably warm weather that accelerated snowmelt throughout the watershed. Ice that had seemed solid for months was now honeycomb with air pockets and weak spots that could collapse without warning. He reached the creek bank to find the younger pack members in various states of agitation along the water's edge. The pup whose leg he had freed from a trap weeks earlier had apparently attempted to cross on what appeared to be solid ice. The surface had given way, plunging the young wolf through into the swift current below. The animal's head and front paws were visible above water, desperately scratching at ice edges that continued breaking away under its weight. The current was strong enough to prevent swimming to shore, and the water temperature was certainly cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. Without immediate rescue, the pup would drown or freeze long before it could reach safety on its own. But Michael was not the only potential rescuer responding to the crisis. The adult wolves had arrived at different points along the creek bank, their behavior showing the focused intensity that characterized emergency response. The alpha female paced frantically at the water's edge, releasing encouraging whines toward her struggling offspring. The alpha male investigated the ice conditions both upstream and downstream, testing surfaces with his weight to identify potential crossing points. The two subordinate adults had taken positions at bends in the creek where the current might carry the pup if it lost its grip on the ice. Their strategic positioning suggested coordinated planning rather than random panic. The pack was organizing a systematic rescue effort using tactics that had probably evolved over countless generations of similar emergencies. Michael assessed the situation with growing alarm. The pup was losing strength rapidly, and its struggles were becoming less coordinated as cold water sapped its energy. Traditional rescue techniques for human ice victims required specialized equipment and multiple personnel, resources he didn't have in this remote wilderness setting. But the wolves' behavior suggested they had their own rescue protocols. The alpha male had identified a relatively stable ice shelf about 30 yards upstream, where the creek bent around a fallen tree. The animal began breaking away chunks of ice with his powerful jaws, apparently attempting to create a path through which he could reach the struggling pup. Michael understood immediately that human and wolf rescue efforts needed to be coordinated rather than competitive. His longer reach and opposable thumbs gave him advantages in ice rescue that the wolves lacked, while their superior strength and cold tolerance provided capabilities he couldn't match. Moving to the alpha male's position, Michael began assisting with the ice-breaking effort. Using his emergency ice axe, he could fracture ice sheets more efficiently than the wolf's teeth and claws, while the alpha could clear away the broken pieces with greater speed than Michael's gloved hands allowed. Their collaboration attracted the attention of the alpha female, who immediately joined the effort. The three rescuers, 2 wolves and 1 human, worked with desperate efficiency to create a channel through the ice field toward the struggling pup. Communication between species was reduced to essential gestures and shared understanding of their common goal. The rescue corridor gradually extended toward the pup's position, but progress was agonizingly slow. Each few feet of advancement required breaking through ice layers of varying thickness and clearing away debris that could impede further progress. The young wolf's cries were becoming weaker, indicating that time was running out. Michael made the decision to enter the water himself. Hypothermia was a serious risk, but his experience with ice water rescues gave him better survival odds than the exhausted pup possessed. He removed his pack and outer clothing, retaining only essential insulation for the brief period he expected to be in the water. The alpha female seemed to understand his intention and moved to a position where she could assist if the rescue attempt put Michael in danger. Her readiness to risk her own safety for both her offspring and their human partner demonstrated trust that transcended normal pack loyalty boundaries. Michael lowered himself into the ice-cold creek, gasping as the water temperature shocked his system. The current was stronger than it had appeared from shore, and the broken ice created additional hazards that made swimming treacherous. But the pup was only 20 feet away, still clinging to ice fragments with diminishing strength. Reaching the exhausted animal required careful navigation through floating ice chunks that could cause injury or impede rescue efforts. Michael approached from downstream to avoid being struck by debris carried by the current. The pup watched his advance with eyes that showed recognition despite its desperate circumstances. Getting a secure grip on the wet, struggling animal proved more challenging than Michael had anticipated. The pup's natural response to being grabbed was to struggle, which created additional dangers for both rescuer and victim in the swift current. Michael had to balance firm control with gentle reassurance, communicating safety through touch and tone of voice. The return journey to shore was complicated by the pup's dead weight and Michael's own rapidly diminishing strength as cold water sapped his energy. The alpha female positioned herself at the creek edge where she could grab her offspring if Michael's grip failed, while the alpha male cleared ice debris from their path. Reaching the bank required a coordinated effort between human and wolves. Michael lifted the pup as high as possible, while the alpha female seized her offspring's scruff in her powerful jaws. Between them, They managed to pull the exhausted young wolf onto solid ground, though both rescuers were now showing signs of dangerous cold exposure. The pack's response to the successful rescue was immediate and comprehensive. The adults surrounded the hypothermic pup with their warm bodies, using shared body heat to combat the life-threatening temperature drop. Michael, equally affected by cold water exposure, was included in their warming efforts without hesitation. The experience of being warmed by a pile of wolves was surreal beyond description. Their dense fur provided insulation that his wet clothing couldn't match, and their body heat was supplemented by active warming behaviors. Warm breath directed at his extremities, strategic positioning to block wind, and physical contact that maintained circulation in areas prone to frostbite. For 20 minutes, human and wolves formed a unified survival unit focused on bringing two hypothermia victims back to safe body temperatures. The collaboration was intimate and instinctual, transcending species boundaries through shared vulnerability and mutual care. Michael had never felt such complete acceptance by wild animals, nor such profound gratitude for their assistance in his own survival. As circulation returned to his fingers and toes, Michael was able to assess the pup's condition. The young wolf was alert and responsive, though still shivering from its ordeal. The rescue had been successful, but the animal would need continued warmth and rest to fully recover from its ice water immersion. The pack's departure from the rescue site was unhurried, allowing the recovered pup to set a pace that didn't strain its weakened condition. Michael gathered his scattered equipment while the wolves organized their procession, but the alpha pair lingered to ensure he was fully recovered from his own cold exposure. The alpha female approached Michael directly and engaged in the nose-touch greeting that had become their standard acknowledgement of partnership. But this time, the gesture carried additional meaning: gratitude for risking his life to save her offspring, and recognition that their collaborative relationship had evolved into something resembling family bonds. The alpha male's farewell was equally significant. The massive wolf placed his paw briefly on Michael's boot, a gesture of physical contact that conveyed both thanks and acceptance. Michael responded by placing his hand gently on the wolf's head, completing an exchange that formalized their relationship as allies rather than merely cooperating strangers. As the pack disappeared into the forest with their rescued member, Michael reflected on the morning's extraordinary events. The ice rescue had required capabilities from both species that neither could have provided alone. Human tools and techniques had been essential, but so had wolf strength, cold tolerance, and coordinated pack behavior. The successful rescue had also demonstrated the depth of trust that now existed between human and wolves. The pack had allowed Michael to enter their emergency response protocols as a trusted partner, while he had risked his life for their offspring without hesitation. The relationship had transcended professional conservation work to become something resembling kinship. Michael's documentation of the incident would focus on wildlife rescue techniques and the importance of rapid response to hypothermia emergencies. But the deeper significance lay in the demonstration of interspecies cooperation under life-threatening conditions. Trust established through routine collaboration had proven strong enough to function in crisis situations where mistakes could prove fatal. The ice rescue marked a turning point in Michael's understanding of human-wildlife relationships. Partnership was no longer experimental. It had become operational reality with proven effectiveness under extreme conditions. The challenge ahead was expanding and protecting such relationships while documenting their value for broader conservation applications. As he hiked back to his vehicle, Michael's clothes gradually dried in the warming spring air. Somewhere ahead, a rescued wolf pup was recovering from near drowning with the help of pack mates who had learned to work with humans as partners in survival. The collaboration had saved lives on both sides of the species divide, proving that trust could overcome barriers that evolution had supposedly made permanent. The afternoon sun was melting the remaining ice along Willow Creek, preparing the waterway for spring conditions that would bring new challenges and opportunities for human-wolf partnership. Tomorrow would offer fresh chances to build on the foundation of trust established through shared danger and mutual rescue. The first warm day of May brought transformations that extended far beyond the obvious changes in weather and vegetation. Michael noticed it immediately during his morning patrol. The pack's behavior had shifted from the cautious winter patterns he had grown familiar to something more confident and expansive. The wolves moved through their territory with the relaxed authority of animals who had successfully navigated the harsh months and emerged stronger. Spring had arrived early in the Cascade Mountains, triggered by a series of warm Pacific storms that melted snow at unprecedented rates and awakened the forest from its winter dormancy. Streams ran full and clear, carrying the mineral scent of snowmelt down from the high peaks. Wildflowers appeared in sheltered meadows where snow had lingered just weeks before, painting the landscape in colors that seemed almost artificial after months of monochrome winter. But the most remarkable change was in the wolves themselves. Their winter coats were giving way to sleeker spring pelage, and their movements carried the confident energy of predators whose territory was secure and whose pack bonds had been strengthened by shared survival challenges. The collaboration with Michael had apparently become an accepted element of their territorial management, integrated into their broader survival strategies with seamless efficiency. Michael first encountered the pack near Aspen Grove, where natural clearing provided excellent visibility in all directions. The wolves were engaged in what appeared to be a formal introduction ceremony, though the participants were not what he might have expected. 5 adult wolves surrounded 2 smaller forms that were clearly very young pups, probably no more than 8 weeks old. The alpha pair had successfully bred during the previous winter, producing the next generation that would carry forward both genetic heritage and learned behaviors. But as Michael observed the introduction process, he realized that the pups were being presented not only to pack members, but to him as well. The adult wolves had positioned themselves in a semicircle that included Michael's approach route, creating a formal presentation that encompassed the human member of their extended territory community. The gesture was unprecedented in Michael's experience with wild animals. Wolves typically protected their offspring with fanatical intensity, keeping pups hidden in secure dens until they were old enough to travel safely with the pack. To expose vulnerable young to human presence required trust that transcended normal predator caution about potential threats to their genetic future. The 2 pups were perfect specimens of wolf genetics, one dark like its father, the other showing the silver-gray markings that characterized the alpha female's lineage. Both were healthy and alert, with the oversized ears and clumsy coordination that made young wolves endearingly puppy-like despite their predator heritage. Their behavior showed curiosity rather than fear as they investigated this strange bipedal creature who had somehow earned inclusion in their pack's social circle. Michael remained motionless during the introduction ceremony, understanding instinctively that his role was to receive rather than direct this remarkable demonstration of trust. The adult wolves took turns bringing each pup closer to his position, allowing the young animals to absorb his scent and appearance while maintaining protective supervision of the interaction. The previously injured pup, now fully recovered and obviously accepted as a successful adult pack member, played a particularly active role in the introduction process. The young wolf seemed to serve as a bridge between the new pups and the human, demonstrating through its relaxed behavior that Michael posed no threat to pack offspring. As the ceremony concluded, the alpha female approached Michael directly with one of the pups in her mouth, carrying the youngster with the careful gentleness that characterized maternal transport. She placed the pup within 3 feet of Michael's boots, then stepped back to observe the interaction between human and the next generation of her family line. The pup showed no fear of the towering human form, instead displaying the confident curiosity that characterized healthy young predators. It sniffed at Michael's boots and snowshoe bindings, apparently cataloging scents that would become associated with safety and partnership rather than danger. The learning process was already beginning for animals that would grow up considering humans as potential allies rather than inevitable enemies. Michael extended his hand slowly toward the investigating pup, allowing the young wolf to make the choice about physical contact. After several minutes of careful scent analysis, the pup touched its small black nose to Michael's gloved finger, completing a first contact that would shape its future relationships with beneficial humans. The second pup required similar introduction protocols, though its approach was more cautious than its sibling's bold investigation. The alpha male provided encouragement through low whines and gentle nuzzling, communicating to his offspring that this particular human had earned pack acceptance through demonstrated trustworthiness. The introduction ceremony lasted nearly an hour, during which Michael was formally acknowledged as an extended pack member with specific responsibilities toward the cub's welfare and education. The adult wolves demonstrated through their behavior that he was expected to participate in the youngster's survival education, teaching them about human-related dangers and collaborative opportunities. As spring progressed, Michael's interactions with the pack evolved to include the educational responsibilities that came with his adopted status. The adult wolves began bringing the pups to training stations where warning marker systems could be demonstrated and practiced. The young animals learned to associate human signals with potential dangers, developing recognition skills that would serve them throughout their lives. The educational process was remarkably sophisticated, combining traditional wolf instruction techniques with innovative elements that incorporated human partnership. Adult wolves would demonstrate proper investigation procedures at warning markers, while Michael provided human-specific knowledge about trap mechanisms and other mechanical dangers that wolves might encounter. The pups proved to be enthusiastic students, displaying the intelligence and adaptability that made wolves such successful survivors across diverse environments. They quickly learned to recognize and interpret the various warning signals that Michael and the pack had developed, treating the human-wolf communication system as a natural element of their wilderness education. By June, the young wolves were accompanying their parents on extended territorial patrols that included collaborative work with Michael. The pups served as observers during trap removal operations, learning to identify dangerous devices through both scent and visual recognition. Their education was preparing them to continue the partnership into the next generation. The integration of human collaboration into pack culture represented an evolutionary development that extended far beyond individual learning. Knowledge about beneficial human relationships was being transmitted through the same social mechanisms that preserve hunting techniques, territorial boundaries, and pack hierarchy. The partnership had become institutionalized within wolf society. Michael documented this cultural transmission process with growing excitement about its implications for wildlife management. If beneficial human-animal relationships could be preserved and transmitted across generations, conservation efforts could achieve sustainability that didn't depend on individual human dedication or institutional continuity. The pups' rapid learning also demonstrated the flexibility that allowed wolves to adapt to changing environmental conditions. Their willingness to incorporate human partnership into their survival strategies suggested that wild animals possessed greater behavioral plasticity than traditional wildlife management approaches had recognized. But Michael was also conscious of the vulnerabilities that accompanied the pups' learned trust in humans. If they encountered hunters or trappers who didn't share his conservation values, their conditioning to approach humans could prove fatal rather than beneficial. The partnership required careful management to prevent tragic misunderstandings. The solution emerged through the pack's own behavioral adaptations. The adult wolves had developed sophisticated discrimination abilities that allowed them to distinguish between beneficial and potentially dangerous humans. They began teaching the pups similar recognition skills, creating a curriculum that emphasized caution while preserving opportunities for collaborative relationships. The discrimination training involved exposing the pups to various human-related stimuli under controlled conditions. The adults would demonstrate appropriate responses to different types of human activity, partnership behaviors for conservation work, avoidance strategies for hunting activity, and alert responses to unfamiliar human presence in their territory. By midsummer, the young wolves were displaying remarkable sophistication in their human-related responses. They could distinguish between Michael's scent and those of other humans, and they had learned to interpret various types of human equipment and activity in ways that informed their behavioral choices. The success of the educational program reinforced Michael's conviction that intelligent wildlife species possess capabilities that traditional management approaches had consistently underestimated. The pups' rapid learning and behavioral flexibility suggested that human-wildlife partnerships could be developed across a broad range of species and environmental conditions. As summer progressed toward autumn, Michael began preparing documentation of the partnership's success that could eventually support broader applications of collaborative conservation techniques. The wolf pack's acceptance of human partnership and their success in transmitting that knowledge to the next generation provided compelling evidence for revolutionary changes in wildlife management philosophy. The young wolves were growing rapidly, developing the physical capabilities that would allow them to participate actively in collaborative conservation work rather than simply observing their parents' activities. Their education was preparing them to expand the partnership's scope and effectiveness as they matured into full pack members. The spring and summer months had demonstrated that trust between species could be institutionalized and transmitted across generations through natural learning processes. The partnership was no longer dependent on individual relationships, but had become a sustainable element of pack culture that would persist regardless of personnel changes in human conservation efforts. The implications extended far beyond a single wolf pack in the Cascade Mountains. If similar partnerships could be developed with other wildlife species, conservation efforts could achieve unprecedented effectiveness through collaborative rather than interventionist approaches. The experimental relationship had proven concepts that could transform human interactions with the natural world. As autumn approached, Michael looked forward to documenting the continued success of multi-generational human-wolf partnership. The pups would soon be old enough to participate directly in conservation work, bringing fresh energy and perspectives to collaborative efforts that had already exceeded every measure of success he had originally envisioned. The forest was preparing for another winter, but this time the preparation included planning for continued partnership between species that had learned to trust each other despite evolutionary programming that should have kept them permanently separated. The relationship had transcended experimental status to become a permanent feature of wilderness management in this remote corner of the Cascade Mountains. The educational process Michael witnessed that autumn exceeded every expectation he had developed about wildlife intelligence and social learning. The adult wolves had established what could only be described as a formal curriculum for teaching their offspring about collaborative safety techniques, with lessons structured as methodically as any human educational program. The primary classroom was a natural amphitheater formed by granite outcroppings near Cascade Falls, where acoustic properties allowed instructional communications to carry clearly across the teaching area. Here, the alpha pair conducted regular sessions that combined traditional wolf survival education with innovative elements focused on human partnership protocols. Michael first observed a formal lesson during late September, when the pack had gathered in the amphitheater for what appeared to be a routine family meeting. The two spring pups, now approaching juvenile size but still showing the gangly proportions of youth, sat attentively while their parents demonstrated proper procedures for investigating human-placed warning markers. The alpha male began by approaching one of Michael's experimental warning stations, displaying the cautious but purposeful behavior that characterized experienced trap detection work. Every movement was deliberate and instructional, designed to show the young wolves how to balance curiosity with safety when investigating unfamiliar human-made objects. The demonstration was remarkably comprehensive. The alpha showed how to approach warning markers from downwind to avoid detection by any humans who might be monitoring the area. He demonstrated proper scent analysis techniques for determining whether markers had been placed by beneficial humans or potentially dangerous strangers. Most importantly, he showed how to interpret the directional information contained in marker arrangements without disturbing the signals themselves. The alpha female contributed lessons focused on coordination between pack members during collaborative operations. She demonstrated how to maintain visual contact with human partners while conducting independent investigations, how to communicate discoveries through subtle body language that wouldn't alert nearby prey animals, and how to provide security for vulnerable human allies who lack the sensory capabilities to detect approaching dangers. But perhaps most remarkably, the adult wolves had begun incorporating Michael directly into their educational sessions. When he appeared at the amphitheater during lesson times, the pack would modify their curriculum to include hands-on demonstrations of human-wolf cooperation techniques. These integrated lessons allowed the young wolves to observe collaborative procedures from both human and wolf perspectives. They could see how Michael interpreted wolf communication signals, how he responded to directional guidance from pack members, and how he adapted his own behavior to complement wolf capabilities during joint operations. The educational program extended beyond simple trap detection to encompass broader survival skills that incorporated human partnership as one resource among many wilderness management techniques. The pups learned when to seek human assistance and when to rely on traditional wolf methods, developing judgment skills that would serve them throughout their adult lives. Michael was particularly impressed by the pack's approach to teaching discrimination between beneficial and dangerous human contacts. The lessons involved exposing the young wolves to various human-related scents and sounds under controlled conditions, with adult pack members demonstrating appropriate responses to each stimulus. The scent discrimination training was especially sophisticated. The adults had collected samples of Michael's equipment, clothing, and personal scents, using these materials to teach the pups recognition of their trusted human partner. But they also introduced unfamiliar human scents associated with hunting and trapping activities, demonstrating alarm responses that warned against contact with potentially hostile humans. The young wolves proved to be exceptional students, displaying learning capabilities that rivaled those of domestic dogs while retaining the sharp survival instincts that characterized their wild heritage. They could distinguish between dozens of different human scents, identify various types of trapping equipment by appearance and smell, and interpret the complex warning marker systems that had evolved through months of collaborative development. By October, the pups were ready to participate in actual field work rather than simply observing their parents' activities. Their first collaborative operation involved a systematic sweep of Pine Ridge area. where Frank Kowalski had indicated probable locations for abandoned trap sites based on historical hunting patterns. The operation demonstrated the remarkable efficiency that could be achieved through multi-generational human-wolf partnership. The adult wolves conducted high-level reconnaissance and strategy development, while the pups provided detailed, ground-level investigation of areas too small or confined for their larger parents to search effectively. Michael's role had evolved from primary investigator to coordinator and specialist consultant, providing technical expertise about trap mechanisms and disposal procedures, while the wolves handled the more dangerous work of actual trap location and initial assessment. The collaboration had achieved a level of professional efficiency that exceeded what any single species could accomplish working alone. The Pine Ridge operation yielded 13 trap sites, including several devices so expertly concealed that even Michael's experienced I would have missed them without wolf guidance. The discovery rate was more than double what he typically achieved working independently, demonstrating the practical benefits of collaborative approaches to wildlife management challenges. But the operation's most significant achievement was the seamless integration of juvenile wolves into complex collaborative procedures. The young animals displayed remarkable maturity and judgment, balancing enthusiastic participation with appropriate caution when investigating potentially dangerous situations. The pack's educational success had profound implications for the sustainability of human-wolf partnerships. Knowledge and techniques that had required months to develop through trial and error were being transmitted to the next generation through systematic instruction that compressed learning curves and reduced risks associated with inexperienced participation. Michael began documenting the educational processes he observed, recognizing their potential value for understanding wildlife learning capabilities and developing collaborative conservation programs with other species. The wolves had developed teaching methods that could potentially be adapted for partnership programs with bears, cougars, or other intelligent predators. The documentation process required careful balance between scientific accuracy and operational security. While the educational methods deserved recognition within the wildlife management community, premature publicity could attract unwanted attention that might disrupt the delicate trust relationships that made the collaboration possible. Michael's solution was to create parallel documentation systems, official reports that focused on trap removal statistics and general wildlife behavior observations, and private records that preserve detailed accounts of educational processes and collaborative techniques for future reference and potential publication under appropriate circumstances. The private documentation revealed educational sophistication that challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife intelligence and social learning capabilities. The wolves had developed curriculum, teaching methods, and assessment procedures that demonstrated cognitive abilities previously unrecognized by mainstream wildlife research. The assessment procedures were particularly impressive. Adult wolves continuously evaluated their offspring's progress through structured testing that determined readiness for advancement to more complex collaborative tasks. The young animals had to demonstrate competency in basic skills before being allowed to participate in operations that involve greater risks or responsibilities. These assessment procedures included practical examinations where pups had to locate hidden traps using only scent analysis, interpret complex warning marker arrangements without guidance from adults, and demonstrate proper safety protocols during simulated emergency situations. The testing was rigorous, but appropriate for the high-stakes environment in which these skills would be applied. Mistakes in trap detection could prove fatal, and partnership with humans required judgment capabilities that exceeded normal wolf social interactions. The educational program ensured that young wolves were thoroughly prepared for adult responsibilities. By late autumn, both pups had graduated to full participation in collaborative operations. Their integration into the partnership had doubled the pack's effectiveness in trap detection while providing redundancy that improved safety margins for all participants. The multi-generational partnership had evolved from experimental collaboration to operational system with proven effectiveness and sustainable development protocols. The wolves had created institutional knowledge that would persist across individual lifespans and personnel changes, ensuring continuity regardless of future circumstances. Michael reflected on the extraordinary year of development that had transformed a chance encounter with a trapped wolf into a comprehensive partnership between species. The collaboration had achieved practical conservation results that exceeded all expectations while demonstrating possibilities for human-wildlife relationships that challenge traditional management philosophies. The coming winter would provide new opportunities to test the partnership's durability under harsh conditions that had previously limited collaborative activities. But Michael was confident that the relationship had matured beyond experimental status to become a permanent and valuable element of wilderness management in the Cascade Mountains. The educational success of the pack's teaching programs suggested that collaborative conservation could be scaled to include multiple wolf families, creating networks of human-wildlife partnerships that spanned entire ecosystems. The potential for revolutionary changes in conservation practice seemed limited only by institutional willingness to embrace innovative approaches. As the first snow of winter began falling on the mountains, Michael looked forward to another season of collaborative work with partners who had proven that trust between species could overcome barriers that evolution had supposedly made permanent. The relationship had transcended its experimental origins to become a model for sustainable conservation that honored both human capabilities and wildlife intelligence. The depth of connection between Michael and the alpha pair became evident during a November snowstorm that trapped them together in a natural shelter for nearly 18 hours. What began as a routine patrol had transformed into an intimate glimpse of wolf social dynamics and the extraordinary trust that had developed between human and predator over months of collaborative work. Michael had been tracking illegal snowmobile activity near the wilderness boundary when the storm struck with unexpected intensity. Weather forecasts had predicted light snow, but mountain conditions proved far more severe, with winds exceeding 50 miles per hour and visibility reduced to less than 10 feet. Continuing toward his vehicle would have been suicidal in such conditions. The alpha pair appeared through the driving snow like materializations of the storm itself, their dark forms barely visible against the white chaos surrounding them. Their presence was no accident. They had been tracking Michael's progress through their territory and recognized the danger posed by the rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. The wolves led him to a cave system formed by falling granite slabs near Timber Creek, providing natural shelter that would protect against wind and accumulating snow. The cave entrance was partially concealed by vegetation, offering security from potential discovery by other humans while providing adequate space for both human and wolf occupants. Inside the shelter, Michael found himself sharing space with predators in conditions of enforced intimacy that would normally trigger aggressive territorial responses. Instead, the wolves settled beside him with the comfortable familiarity of longtime companions, their body heat contributing to the warmth that would keep all three occupants alive through the storm. The alpha male positioned himself near the cave entrance where he could monitor weather conditions and potential threats, while the female settled closer to Michael in what appeared to be a deliberately protective arrangement. Their behavior suggested sophisticated understanding of cooperative survival strategies that transcended species boundaries. As darkness fell and the storm continued its assault on the mountains, Michael experienced wolf social behaviors that few humans had ever witnessed. The alpha pair engaged in quiet communication through subtle whines, body positioning, and scent marking that maintained their bond while acknowledging his presence as a temporary but welcomed pack member. The female's acceptance was particularly remarkable. She allowed Michael to share her body heat during the coldest hours of the night, positioning herself against his back to provide insulation that his inadequate winter clothing couldn't supply. Her trust was absolute. She dozed fitfully while maintaining contact with a potential predator who could have harmed her during her vulnerable sleep periods. The male's vigilance was equally impressive. Throughout the night, he maintained watch over both his mate and their human companion, occasionally venturing to the cave entrance to assess storm conditions, but always returning to ensure their collective security. His protective behavior included Michael as a pack member deserving of his guardian attention. The extended confinement provided unprecedented opportunities for Michael to observe wolf communication systems that operated below the threshold of human detection. The alpha pair maintained constant contact through micro-expressions, scent exchanges, and physical positioning that conveyed complex information about emotional states, environmental assessments, and strategic planning. Their communication was particularly fascinating during the night hours when auditory signals needed to be minimized to avoid attracting potential threats. The wolves had developed silent language systems that relied on touch, subtle movements, and chemical signals that created rich information exchange without compromising their security. Michael found himself inadvertently participating in these communication networks as the wolves incorporated his responses into their ongoing dialogue. When he shifted position or changed breathing patterns, the alpha pair would adjust their own behaviors to maintain optimal thermal efficiency and security arrangements for their mixed species group. The experience revealed dimensions of wolf intelligence that exceeded even Michael's elevated expectations. The animals demonstrated strategic thinking that extended hours into the future, emotional regulation under stressful conditions, and social flexibility that allowed them to adapt pack behaviors to include a fundamentally different species member. Most remarkably, the wolves showed genuine concern for Michael's welfare that went beyond simple cooperation towards something resembling friendship. When his inadequate gear failed to provide sufficient warmth, the female moved closer to share additional body heat. When anxiety about the storm's duration affected his sleep, the male provided reassurance through calm presence and steady breathing that helped regulate Michael's stress responses. Dawn brought clearing skies and the opportunity to assess their shared survival experience. The storm had deposited nearly 3 feet of new snow, creating conditions that would have been fatal for anyone caught in the open. The natural shelter and wolf companionship had provided survival resources that neither human nor animal could have achieved independently. The alpha pair's behavior during their departure from a shelter was ceremonial in its significance. Both wolves approached Michael for extended nose-touch greetings that conveyed gratitude, affection, and renewed commitment to their partnership. The gestures were unmistakably emotional, expressing feelings that transcended practical collaboration toward genuine interspecies friendship. As they traveled together through the post-storm landscape, Michael noticed that their relationship had evolved beyond previous levels of cooperation. The wolves now anticipated his needs and limitations with remarkable accuracy, adjusting their pace and route selection to accommodate his inferior snow travel capabilities without compromising their own efficiency. The alpha female demonstrated particular sensitivity to Michael's condition, frequently checking to ensure he was managing the difficult traveling conditions successfully. Her concern was maternal in its attention to detail, suggesting that humans had been incorporated into her protective instincts normally reserved for pack offspring. The male's behavior was equally remarkable in its demonstration of trust and partnership. He shared leadership responsibilities during their journey, consulting Michael about route choices and timing decisions that affected their collective welfare. The collaboration had become genuinely reciprocal rather than merely cooperative. Their journey back to civilization provided opportunities for Michael to observe how the overnight bonding experience had influenced broader pack dynamics. When they encountered the other pack members, the alpha pair communicated their enhanced trust in their human partner through body language and scent marking that apparently transmitted acceptance throughout the group hierarchy. The younger wolves' response was immediate and striking. Animals that had previously maintained respectful distances now approached Michael with confidence that indicated full acceptance as an extended pack member. The overnight shelter experience had apparently elevated his status within wolf social structures to unprecedented levels. The implications were profound for understanding how trust relationships could develop between species with supposedly incompatible social systems. The wolves had demonstrated capacity for emotional bonds that transcended survival utility, suggesting that genuine friendship could exist between humans and wild predators under appropriate circumstances. Michael's documentation of the shelter experience focused on survival techniques and weather emergency protocols, but his private records preserved the emotional and social details that revealed the depth of interspecies connection that had developed. The relationship had transcended professional collaboration to become something resembling family bonds. The trust demonstrated during their shared vulnerability had created obligations on both sides that would influence future interactions. Michael understood that he had been accepted into wolf social structures that carried responsibilities for pack welfare extending beyond simple trap removal or conservation assistance. The wolves had similarly committed to protective behaviors toward their human partner that exceeded normal territorial tolerance. Their willingness to share resources and provide security during emergency conditions established reciprocal obligations that would persist throughout their relationship. As winter deepened, the enhanced trust relationship proved its value through improved collaborative effectiveness and expanded partnership opportunities. The alpha pair began sharing information about territory-wide conditions that helped Michael identify conservation challenges and opportunities across broader areas than he could monitor independently. Their communication had evolved to include complex information about human activities in their territory, illegal hunting pressure, and environmental changes that affected both wolf welfare and conservation management objectives. The partnership had become a comprehensive information-sharing arrangement that benefited both human and wildlife management goals. The November storm experience marked a turning point in Michael's understanding of what was possible in human-wildlife relationships. The depth of trust and emotional connection achieved during their shared survival had demonstrated that barriers between species were more permeable than traditional conservation philosophy recognized. The winter ahead would provide new opportunities to explore the implications of enhanced trust relationships while testing the durability of bonds established through shared vulnerability. Michael looked forward to continued collaboration with partners who had proven that friendship could transcend evolutionary programming that should have kept them permanently separated by mutual fear and misunderstanding. The blizzard arrived without warning on a February morning when Michael was conducting a routine boundary survey near the Canadian border. Weather forecasts had predicted partly cloudy skies with temperatures in the 20s, but mountain weather proved unpredictable as always. Within 30 minutes, conditions deteriorated from pleasant winter hiking to a life-threatening whiteout with wind speeds approaching 60 miles per hour. Michael's first indication of serious trouble came when his GPS unit began showing erratic readings due to satellite interference from the storm system. The electronic compass spun wildly as magnetic interference from the weather front disrupted its calibration. Within moments, he was effectively lost in terrain he had patrolled for 4 years, surrounded by swirling snow that reduced visibility to arm's length. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Michael could feel hypothermia beginning to affect his coordination and judgment. His winter gear was adequate for normal patrol conditions, but insufficient for the extreme cold and wind exposure he now faced. Without shelter, he would likely succumb to exposure within hours rather than days. Michael's training emphasized staying put during whiteout conditions, but his current position offered no natural windbreak or shelter options. He was caught in an exposed saddle between two ridges where the wind created Venturi effects that amplified its destructive power. Moving was dangerous, but remaining stationary was potentially fatal. His emergency beacon was functioning, but rescue operations would be impossible until the storm passed, which could be days given the intensity of the system. The beacon would help recovery teams locate his body, but it provided no immediate assistance with survival in conditions that were beyond the limits of his equipment and experience. The first sign of hope came as wolf tracks that appeared suddenly in the driving snow beside his position. The tracks were fresh despite the wind conditions, suggesting that wolves were actively moving through terrain that had defeated his navigation abilities. More importantly, the track pattern indicated purposeful travel rather than the random wandering that might characterize lost or confused animals. Michael followed the tracks with growing desperation, hoping that wolf navigation instincts would lead towards shelter that human technology couldn't locate. The animals possessed superior senses and intimate knowledge of terrain features that might provide survival resources he couldn't identify independently. The tracks led him through a landscape that had become alien due to storm conditions, but the consistent direction suggested the wolves were following familiar routes despite the visual obstacles. Michael trusted their navigation more than his own increasingly compromised judgment as cold began affecting his cognitive abilities. 20 minutes of difficult travel brought him to a complex of fallen trees that created natural shelter from the worst wind effects. But more remarkably, the shelter was already occupied by the alpha pair, who had apparently been waiting for his arrival rather than simply seeking their own protection from the storm. The wolves' presence was clearly intentional rather than coincidental. They had tracked his progress through the storm and positioned themselves to provide guidance toward survival resources he couldn't have found alone. Their behavior demonstrated tactical thinking and coordinated rescue operations that exceeded even Michael's elevated expectations of their capabilities. The alpha female approached him directly despite the chaos of wind and driving snow, her body language conveying urgent instructions about shelter construction and thermal management. She led him to the most protected area within the fallen tree complex, where wind effects were minimized and natural insulation materials were available. The male had already begun preparing a depression in the snow that would provide additional protection from ground-level cold effects. His work was systematic and purposeful, creating a survival shelter using techniques that humans had learned from observing wolf behavior during extreme weather conditions. Working together, human and wolves constructed a shelter that combined the best elements of both species' survival knowledge. Michael contributed technical understanding of insulation principles and wind protection, while the wolves provided superior assessment of terrain features and weather pattern predictions. The construction process required intimate cooperation as they worked within arm's reach of each other in conditions where visibility and communication were severely limited. Trust was absolute. Michael's survival depended on wolf guidance, while the wolves were committing resources and energy that they would need for their own survival if their rescue attempt failed. Once the shelter was complete, the wolves demonstrated the same protective behaviors Michael had experienced during their previous overnight encounter. The alpha pair positioned themselves to share body heat while maintaining security watch for potential threats that could exploit their temporary vulnerability. But this emergency was more severe than their previous shared survival experience. The storm continued for over 48 hours, creating conditions that tested the limits of their collective survival resources. Food supplies were minimal, and energy conservation became critical for preventing hypothermia in all three occupants. The wolves shared their body heat generously despite their own metabolic needs, maintaining physical contact that provided thermal regulation for their human companion. Their sacrifice was remarkable given that hypothermia was equally dangerous for them as for Michael. Yet they prioritized his welfare despite his species' inferior cold tolerance. The alpha female's maternal behaviors were particularly striking during the extended emergency. She monitored Michael's condition constantly, adjusting her position to provide maximum thermal benefit when his shivering indicated dangerous heat loss. Her attention was protective and nurturing in ways that transcended simple pack loyalty. The male maintained vigilance despite their shared exhaustion, periodically checking weather conditions and escape route options while ensuring that their shelter remained structurally sound against wind damage. His leadership during the crisis was inclusive, treating Michael as a pack member deserving of protection rather than a burden that complicated their survival. Communication during the extended confinement relied heavily on nonverbal exchanges that revealed the sophistication of interspecies understanding they had developed. The wolves could interpret Michael's condition through breathing patterns, movement coordination, and thermal output that indicated his physiological status with remarkable accuracy. Michael reciprocated by monitoring wolf behavior for signs of stress or resource depletion that might require conservation adjustments. The collaboration was genuinely reciprocal despite their species differences, with each participant contributing unique capabilities to their collective survival effort. The storm's peak intensity occurred during their second night in the shelter, when wind speeds exceeded 70 miles per hour and temperatures dropped below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival became a minute-by-minute challenge that required constant adjustment of thermal management and shelter maintenance procedures. During the worst conditions, the wolves demonstrated remarkable devotion to their human partner's welfare. When Michael's hypothermia became life-threatening despite their shared body heat, the alpha pair took turns warming his extremities with their breath while maintaining overall thermal contact that prevented complete system failure. Their life-saving efforts were sustained for hours without regard for their own energy depletion or survival requirements. The sacrifice was extraordinary by any measure, but particularly remarkable given evolutionary programming that should have prioritized their own survival over that of a potential competitor species. Dawn of the third day brought clearing skies and the opportunity to assess their survival success. All three occupants had survived conditions that would have been fatal individually, though Michael's hypothermia required careful management during their return to warmer conditions. The wolves' guidance during their evacuation from the emergency shelter was essential for Michael's safe return to civilization. His cold-induced disorientation made independent navigation impossible, while his companions retained superior awareness of terrain features and route optimization despite their own exhaustion. The rescue had been complete in every respect. The wolves had located Michael during life-threatening conditions, guided him to survival shelter, contributed essential resources during extended emergency confinement, and provided navigation assistance for safe return to human civilization. But perhaps most remarkably, The rescue had been entirely voluntary. The wolves had risked their own survival to assist their human partner without expectation of reward or reciprocal assistance. Their behavior demonstrated genuine altruism that transcended species boundaries and challenged assumptions about animal motivation systems. Michael's recovery from the hypothermia incident required several days of rest and medical attention. But the psychological impact was even more profound than the physical effects. The wolves' willingness to sacrifice their welfare for his survival had demonstrated trust and friendship that exceeded anything he had experienced with his own species. The implications for human-wildlife relationships were revolutionary. If wild predators could develop such deep emotional connections with humans, traditional conservation approaches based on species separation might be unnecessarily limiting rather than protective. The rescue experience had proven that cooperation could evolve into genuine friendship when trust was established through consistent beneficial interactions over extended periods. The wolves had treated Michael's emergency as their own, responding with resources and commitment that defined family relationships rather than simple partnerships. As Michael documented the incident for his private records, he understood that he had experienced something unique in the history of human-wildlife relationships. The depth of interspecies connection demonstrated during the emergency had transcended every boundary that evolution should have maintained between predator and potential prey. The coming spring would bring new opportunities to explore the implications of such profound trust relationships while continuing the collaborative conservation work that had created the foundation for genuine friendship between traditional enemies. The comprehensive documentation project began in earnest during March, when Michael realized that his experimental collaboration with the wolf pack had generated knowledge that could revolutionize wildlife management practices across North America. The success of their partnership demanded systematic recording and analysis that would preserve techniques for future application while protecting the wolves from unwanted attention. Michael's approach was methodical, drawing on his architectural background to create detailed maps and diagrams that captured both the geographical scope of their collaborative territory and the specific techniques that had proven most effective. Each trap removal site was precisely plotted using GPS coordinates, with accompanying notes about discovery methods, wolf assistance levels, and environmental factors that influence success rates. The mapping project revealed patterns that had been invisible during the day-to-day work of trap removal. Illegal trapping had followed predictable geographical logic, concentrating in areas where natural terrain features created bottlenecks that forced animals into specific travel corridors. Understanding these patterns would allow future rangers to anticipate trap locations with greater accuracy. But more significantly, the maps documented the evolution of wolf-human communication systems across the territory. Training stations, warning markers, and collaborative work sites formed a network that spanned over 200 square miles of wilderness. The system represented the first known example of sustained interspecies cooperation for conservation purposes. Michael's documentation went beyond simple geographical plotting to include detailed behavioral observations that captured the sophistication of wolf learning and communication abilities. His private journals contained hundreds of pages describing specific interactions, learning processes, and innovative solutions that the pack had developed for collaborative challenges. The behavioral documentation revealed cognitive capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal intelligence. The wolves had demonstrated strategic thinking, long-term planning, problem-solving skills, and emotional sophistication that exceeded the parameters typically recognized by wildlife research. Their abilities suggested that traditional management approaches had consistently underestimated the potential for human-wildlife partnerships. The communication system documentation was particularly valuable for future applications. Michael had systematically recorded the development of signal systems, marker configurations, and response protocols that allowed effective coordination between human and wolf participants. The techniques could potentially be adapted for collaboration with other intelligent species. Creating the comprehensive documentation required careful balance between scientific accuracy and operational security. While the techniques deserved recognition within the conservation community, premature exposure could attract attention that might disrupt the delicate relationships that made collaboration possible. Michael's solution involved developing parallel documentation systems. Official reports focused on trap removal statistics, general wildlife observations, and routine patrol activities that could withstand bureaucratic scrutiny without revealing the full scope of collaborative activities. These reports provided cover for his extensive fieldwork while maintaining institutional credibility. The private documentation system preserved detailed accounts of collaborative techniques, behavioral observations, and relationship development that would be essential for future research and application development. This material was encrypted and stored in secure locations where institutional oversight couldn't compromise its integrity or the wolf's safety. The documentation project also included photographic evidence that captured collaborative activities without compromising wolf security. Michael had developed techniques for photographing trap removal operations, communication exchanges, and training activities that documented their effectiveness while maintaining the anonymity that protected his partners from unwanted attention. But perhaps most importantly, the documentation preserved the educational methodologies that the wolves had developed for transmitting collaborative knowledge to their offspring. These teaching techniques represented unprecedented insights into animal learning systems and their potential applications for expanding human-wildlife partnerships. The educational documentation revealed that wolf knowledge transmission systems were far more sophisticated than traditional research had recognized. The pack had developed curriculum, assessment procedures, and advancement criteria that ensured thorough preparation of young animals for collaborative responsibilities. Understanding these educational processes was crucial for the sustainability of human-wildlife partnerships. If collaborative techniques could only be transmitted through direct human instruction, their applications would be limited by available personnel and institutional resources. But if animals could teach partnership skills to their own offspring, collaborative programs could achieve self-sustaining expansion. The pack's educational success suggested that other intelligent species might possess similar capabilities for developing and transmitting collaborative knowledge. Bears, cougars, coyotes, and other predators might be capable of partnership relationships if appropriate development techniques were applied. Michael began creating training manuals that would allow other rangers to develop similar partnerships with wildlife in their territories. The manuals combined his documentation of successful techniques with analysis of failure modes and risk management procedures that would maximize safety for both human and animal participants. The training manual development required careful consideration of personality factors and environmental conditions that influence partnership success. Not all humans possess the patience, intuition, and dedication required for developing trust relationships with wild predators. Similarly, not all animal populations had the social structures and learning capabilities that made collaboration practical. The manuals included assessment criteria for evaluating partnership potential, step-by-step development procedures for building trust relationships, and troubleshooting guides for addressing common problems that arose during collaboration development. The materials represented a comprehensive curriculum for training conservation professionals in revolutionary wildlife management techniques. But Michael also recognized that institutional resistance would be a significant barrier to widespread adoption of collaborative conservation methods. Traditional wildlife management was conservative by nature, emphasizing proven techniques over innovative approaches that challenged established protocols. Overcoming institutional resistance would require compelling evidence of collaborative effectiveness combined with careful presentation that emphasized practical benefits rather than revolutionary implications. The documentation needed to demonstrate measurable improvements in conservation outcomes while minimizing emphasis on the unprecedented nature of human-wildlife partnerships. Michael's strategy involved gradual revelation of collaborative techniques through peer-reviewed publications and conference presentations that would build credibility within the professional community. Initial presentations would focus on improved trap detection rates and enhanced wildlife monitoring capabilities, with fuller disclosure of partnership methods following establishment of professional interest. The documentation project also included economic analysis that quantified the cost-effectiveness of collaborative conservation approaches. Working with wolf partners had increased Michael's trap removal efficiency by over 300%, while reducing the time and resources required for comprehensive territory management. The economic benefits were substantial enough to justify program expansion based purely on financial considerations, without requiring acceptance of the revolutionary implications for human-wildlife relationships. Cost-conscious administrators might approve collaborative programs for budgetary reasons, even if they remain skeptical about their philosophical foundations. By late spring, Michael had completed comprehensive documentation that preserved every significant aspect of the collaborative partnership for future reference and application. The materials represented the most complete record of successful human-wildlife cooperation ever assembled, with sufficient detail to support replication efforts across diverse geographical and species contexts. The documentation project had also revealed the extraordinary scope of what had been achieved through patient trust building and mutual respect. The partnership had transcended every boundary that traditional conservation approaches considered permanent, demonstrating possibilities that could transform human relationships with the natural world. As Michael prepared for the next phase of his career, he understood that the documentation represented a legacy that extended far beyond individual conservation achievements. The knowledge preserved in his records could influence wildlife management practices for generations, opening new possibilities for collaboration between humans and the wild creatures we were charged to protect. The challenge ahead involved protecting that legacy while ensuring its eventual contribution to broader conservation efforts. The balance between security and application would determine whether the extraordinary partnership with the Cascade Mountain Wolf Pack would remain a unique historical footnation or become the foundation for revolutionary changes in wildlife management philosophy. The generational transmission of collaborative knowledge became evident during Michael's final spring patrol when he encountered a remarkable scene that validated every optimistic projection about the sustainability of human-wildlife partnerships. The now adult offspring of the original pack were conducting their own educational session with a new litter of pups, teaching collaborative techniques that have been refined through nearly 2 years of successful partnership. The teaching session was taking place in the familiar amphitheater near Cascade Falls, but the instructors were the wolves Michael had watched grow from curious pups into confident adults. They had assumed responsibility for educating the next generation using methods they had learned from their parents, creating an unbroken chain of knowledge transmission that ensured partnership continuity. The adult offspring demonstrated warning marker interpretation with the same methodical precision their parents had used, but with innovations that reflected their own experience and creativity. They had refined the signal systems, simplified some communication protocols, and developed new techniques for coordinating with human partners during complex operations. Most remarkably, the young adults were teaching concepts they had never directly experienced but had absorbed through cultural transmission within the pack. They demonstrated proper responses to various types of human equipment, appropriate behaviors during trap removal operations, and safety protocols for protecting both human and wolf participants during collaborative activities. The new pups were exceptional students, displaying the intelligence and adaptability that characterized their genetic line while showing even greater comfort with human partnership concepts than previous generations had achieved. They were growing up in an environment where collaboration with beneficial humans was simply part of normal pack culture rather than experimental innovation. Michael observed the educational session from a concealed position that allowed detailed documentation without disrupting the wolves' natural teaching processes. His presence was known to the adult instructors, who occasionally glanced in his direction, but they continued their curriculum without modification to accommodate human observation. The sophistication of the educational program had evolved considerably since Michael first witnessed formal instruction sessions. The adult offspring had incorporated lessons learned through practical experience, eliminated techniques that had proven ineffective, and developed new approaches that reflected their maturing understanding of collaborative principles. The curriculum now included advanced topics such as risk assessment for different types of human activity, discrimination between various categories of human equipment and their associated danger levels, and strategic planning for complex multi-day operations that required sustained coordination between species. But perhaps most impressive was the emotional intelligence being transmitted along with practical skills. The adult instructors were teaching appropriate trust levels, boundary recognition, and relationship management techniques that would allow the pups to develop beneficial human partnerships while maintaining essential wild instincts. The pups were learning that humans represented potential allies rather than inevitable enemies, but also that discrimination between beneficial and dangerous humans required sophisticated judgment that could mean the difference between survival and destruction. The educational balance was delicate but essential for their long-term welfare. As spring progressed into summer, Michael had multiple opportunities to observe the new generation's practical application of their collaborative education. The young wolves were eager to participate in actual trap removal operations, though their parents maintained careful supervision to ensure safety during their initial field experiences. The first collaborative operation involving the new pups was a systematic survey of the Bear Creek watershed, where recent illegal trapping activity had been reported by other rangers. The operation would test both the educational effectiveness of the wolves' training program and the sustainability of collaborative techniques across multiple generations. The young wolves' performance exceeded every expectation Michael had developed based on previous generational transitions. They demonstrated immediate competency in all basic collaborative skills, while showing innovative problem-solving abilities that suggested continued evolution of partnership techniques. Their trap detection skills were remarkable, combining inherited sensory advantages with learned recognition patterns that allowed them to identify concealed devices with accuracy that rivaled their experienced parents. But more importantly, they showed judgment and restraint that kept them safe while maximizing their contribution to collaborative success. The Bear Creek operation yielded 15 trap sites, including several devices that represented new configurations and concealment techniques that hadn't been encountered in previous operations. The illegal trappers were apparently adapting their methods in response to increased enforcement pressure, requiring corresponding innovations in detection and removal techniques. The young wolves' fresh perspectives proved valuable in developing countermeasures for the new trap configurations. Their different experiential background and alternative approaches to problem solving provided insights that complemented the established methods of their parents and human partner. Working with multiple generations of wolves simultaneously created operational complexity, but also redundancy that improved both efficiency and safety margins. The experienced adults could handle the most dangerous aspects of trap removal, while the younger animals provided detailed reconnaissance and specialized capabilities that enhanced overall effectiveness. The multi-generational collaboration also provided unprecedented insights into wolf social development and the role of learned behaviors in pack culture. Michael was witnessing the creation of new traditions that would be transmitted indefinitely through normal cultural processes rather than requiring continuous human intervention. The implications were profound for understanding how conservation partnerships could achieve self-sustaining expansion. If wildlife populations could independently maintain and transmit collaborative knowledge, human-wildlife cooperation could scale to ecosystem levels without proportional increases in human resources or institutional support. By late summer, the new generation had achieved full operational status within the collaborative partnership. They were contributing equally to trap detection operations while developing their own innovations and refinements that advanced the overall effectiveness of human-wolf cooperation. But Michael also observed concerning developments that suggested potential vulnerabilities in the generational transmission process. Some of the young wolves showed excessive trust in human contacts, approaching situations with insufficient caution about potential dangers from hostile humans. The trust issues required careful management to prevent tragic misunderstandings that could destroy not only individual wolves, but the broader partnership that had taken years to develop. Michael worked with the adult wolves to refine discrimination training that would preserve collaborative capabilities while maintaining essential survival instincts. The solution involved expanded exposure to various types of human activity under controlled conditions, allowing the young wolves to develop sophisticated assessment skills that could distinguish between beneficial and potentially dangerous human encounters. The training was complex but essential for their long-term survival. As autumn approached, Michael began preparing for his transition to a new assignment in Colorado, where he would attempt to replicate the collaborative partnership with different wolf populations in different environmental conditions. The success of generational transmission in the Cascade Mountains suggested that similar partnerships might be achievable elsewhere. But leaving the original partnership created emotional challenges that Michael hadn't anticipated. The relationships with individual wolves had transcended professional collaboration to become personal bonds that would be difficult to abandon. The wolves had become friends and partners whose welfare remained a permanent concern regardless of geographical separation. The adult offspring seemed to understand that changes were approaching in their partnership arrangements. Their behavior during final collaborative operations showed increased attention to Michael's emotional state and apparent efforts to provide reassurance about the continuity of their relationship despite impending separation. The new pups had bonded with Michael as naturally as with their wolf parents, treating him as a permanent fixture in their social environment. Their trust was absolute and their affection genuine, creating obligations that would persist regardless of institutional assignments or career developments. Michael's final documentation of the generational transmission process focused on the remarkable success of wolf educational systems and their implications for sustainable human-wildlife partnerships. The knowledge transfer had been complete and effective, ensuring continuity that would persist long after his departure. The new generation had not simply learned collaborative techniques, but had improved upon them, suggesting that partnership relationships could evolve and strengthen over time rather than merely maintaining initial success levels. The future held possibilities for continued development and expansion that exceeded even the most optimistic projections. The generational success had validated the most fundamental premise of collaborative conservation, that wildlife populations possess the intelligence and social structures necessary for sustained partnership with human conservation efforts. The experiment had transcended proof of concept status to demonstrate operational viability across multiple generations and extended time periods. As Michael prepared for his final patrols in the Cascade Mountains, he understood that the partnership had achieved permanence that would outlast individual careers and institutional changes. The wolves had created cultural traditions that would preserve collaborative knowledge indefinitely, ensuring that the extraordinary relationship would continue benefiting both species for generations to come. The final patrol began at dawn on a September morning that carried the crisp promise of approaching autumn. Michael had requested permission to conduct one last comprehensive survey of the collaborative territory before his transfer to Colorado, officially to complete trap removal documentation, but personally to experience a farewell that 3 years of unprecedented partnership demanded. The familiar trails held memories that transformed routine patrol activities into emotional pilgrimage through a landscape that had become sacred through shared experience. Every location carried associations with specific collaborative achievements, relationship milestones, and moments of trust building that had gradually transformed enemies into family. Michael's route was designed to visit all the significant sites where breakthrough moments had occurred. The location where he first freed the injured wolf, the amphitheater where educational sessions had been conducted, the creek crossing where interspecies rescue had proven the depth of their mutual commitment. Each stop provided opportunities for reflection and documentation of what had been achieved. The wolves were aware of the significance of this final patrol. Throughout the morning, individual pack members appeared at various points along Michael's route, maintaining visual contact without interfering with his activities. Their presence was respectful but persistent, creating an honor guard that acknowledged the importance of their farewell process. The first formal encounter occurred at the Pine Ridge Overlook, where some of their most successful collaborative operations had been conducted. The entire pack was assembled in a semicircle that faced the panoramic view of their shared territory, their positioning suggesting ceremonial preparation for a significant social event. Michael approached the gathering with emotions that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. These animals had trusted him with their lives, shared their survival resources during emergencies, and accepted him into their family structure with generosity that transcended species boundaries. Their friendship had been the defining experience of his conservation career. The alpha pair approached him first, engaging in the extended nose-touch greetings that had become their standard acknowledgement of partnership. But this interaction was prolonged and intense, conveying emotions that went beyond routine recognition to express gratitude, affection, and something approaching grief at their impending separation. The adult offspring followed with their own farewell gestures, each animal taking time for individual contact that acknowledged their personal relationships with their human partner. Their behavior was solemn and deliberate, suggesting understanding that this interaction was fundamentally different from routine encounters. But the most poignant moments came with the newest generation of pups, who approached Michael with complete trust and obvious confusion about the emotional undercurrents they sensed but couldn't comprehend. These young wolves knew him only as a permanent feature of their social environment, making their innocent affection particularly difficult to accept, knowing it would not be reciprocated through continued presence. The pack's collective behavior during the farewell ceremony was remarkably sophisticated, demonstrating emotional intelligence and social awareness that exceeded every parameter Michael had developed for understanding wolf capabilities. They were conducting a formal goodbye that honored the significance of their relationship while acknowledging its necessary conclusion. After the individual greetings were completed, the pack engaged in group behaviors that seemed designed to provide Michael with final memories of their collaborative partnership. The adults demonstrated some of their most advanced warning marker interpretations, while the young wolves showed off recently mastered trap detection techniques. The demonstration was both celebration of their achievements and gift to their departing partner, providing him with final documentation of the extraordinary capabilities they had developed through collaborative education. Their performance was flawless, showcasing skills that represented revolutionary advances in human-wildlife cooperation. As the ceremony concluded, the alpha male engaged in a behavior that Michael had never witnessed before. The massive wolf approached to within arm's reach and deliberately placed his front paw on Michael's boot, maintaining eye contact that communicated complex emotions across species boundaries. The gesture was unmistakably ceremonial, conveying recognition, gratitude, and formal acknowledgement of partnership that had transcended traditional relationships between human and wildlife. Michael responded by placing his hand gently on the wolf's head, completing an exchange that formalized their bond regardless of geographical separation. The pack's departure from the farewell ceremony was gradual and reluctant, with individual wolves lingering to maintain visual contact as long as possible. Their behavior suggested genuine reluctance to end the interaction, demonstrating emotional attachment that challenged assumptions about animal capacity for friendship with humans. Michael continued his final patrol alone, but remained aware of wolf presence throughout the day. Individual pack members appeared periodically at distances that maintained their security while indicating continued interest in his activities. They were providing escort service that honored their partnership while respecting his need for solitary reflection. The afternoon brought him to Beaver Creek, where his first encounter with a trapped wolf had initiated the extraordinary journey of trust building and collaborative development. The location held special significance as the birthplace of their partnership, making it an appropriate setting for final documentation and personal reflection. Michael spent several hours at the creek site, reviewing his comprehensive documentation and considering the implications of what had been achieved. The partnership had exceeded every optimistic projection about human-wildlife cooperation while demonstrating possibilities that could transform conservation practices across multiple species and environments. The success had validated his conviction that intelligence and good intentions existed throughout the natural world, waiting for appropriate opportunities to express themselves through beneficial relationships. The wolves had proven that collaboration was possible when approached with patience, respect, and genuine commitment to mutual welfare. But the partnership had also demonstrated the fragility of interspecies trust and the care required to protect relationships that could be destroyed by misunderstanding or institutional indifference. The wolves' trust had been earned through consistent beneficial actions over extended periods, but could be lost through single incidents of betrayal or abandonment. Michael's documentation would preserve the knowledge necessary for replicating successful partnerships, but institutional willingness to support such innovative approaches remained uncertain. Traditional conservation philosophy was conservative by nature, emphasizing separation over collaboration despite evidence that partnership approaches could achieve superior results. The challenge ahead involved protecting the Cascade Mountain Partnership while demonstrating its applications in different environments and species contexts. Success in Colorado would provide additional validation for collaborative conservation while reducing dependence on single-location success that might be dismissed as anomalous rather than replicable. As evening approached, Michael made his way to the natural amphitheater for final documentation of the educational facilities that had made generational knowledge transmission possible. The site represented one of their most significant achievements, proving that collaborative partnerships could achieve sustainability through cultural rather than individual transmission. The amphitheater was empty when Michael arrived, but evidence of recent educational activity was visible in the form of practice markers and training materials that the Wolves had prepared for future instruction sessions. The facilities would continue supporting educational programs long after his departure, ensuring continuity for subsequent generations. Michael's final act in the amphitheater was to establish a permanent marker system that would provide guidance for future rangers who might be assigned to this territory. The markers were subtle enough to avoid detection by casual visitors, but clear enough to indicate collaborative opportunities for conservation professionals with appropriate training. The marker system included references to his comprehensive documentation and instructions for accessing the training materials he had developed for replicating successful partnership techniques. Future rangers would have resources necessary for continuing collaborative relationships if they possessed the dedication and skills required for interspecies cooperation. Night had fallen by the time Michael completed his documentation at the amphitheater and began his final hike toward the trailhead where his vehicle waited. The familiar trails were navigable by headlamp, but he found himself reluctant to leave territory that had become home through shared experience with remarkable partners. The wolves appeared one final time as Michael reached the boundary between wilderness and civilization. The entire pack was visible in his headlamp beam, positioned alongside the trail in a formation that resembled an honor guard saluting their departing colleague. The final goodbye was conducted without physical contact, but with emotional intensity that needed no translation. Human and wolves regarded each other across the invisible boundary that separated wilderness from human civilization, acknowledging through silence what words could never adequately express. Michael raised his hand in a gesture of farewell that was answered by the alpha male's dignified nod. The exchange was formal and final, marking the conclusion of a partnership that had transformed both participants while proving that trust could bridge any gap created by evolutionary history. The wolves remained at their positions until Michael's vehicle disappeared around the first bend in the forest road. Their vigil was the final act of protection they could provide for their departing partner, ensuring his safe transition from their territory to whatever challenges awaited in his new assignment. As Michael drove through the darkness toward his uncertain future, he carried with him the knowledge that extraordinary relationships were possible between humans and the wild creatures we were charged to protect. The wolves had taught him that intelligence, loyalty, and friendship existed throughout the natural world, waiting for appropriate opportunities to flourish. The partnership had achieved everything he had hoped for and more than he had dared to imagine. Trust had overcome fear. Collaboration had replaced competition, and friendship had transcended the boundaries that evolution had supposedly made permanent. The relationship had proven that humans could be worthy partners rather than inevitable enemies of the wild. But perhaps most importantly, the partnership had demonstrated that change was possible in both human and wildlife behavior when approached with patience, respect, and genuine commitment to mutual benefit. The wolves had adapted their ancient survival strategies to include human cooperation, while Michael had learned to see beyond traditional conservation approaches toward revolutionary possibilities for species collaboration. The success in the Cascade Mountains represented a beginning rather than an ending. The knowledge preserved in his documentation would support replication efforts across diverse geographical and species contexts, potentially transforming conservation practices throughout North America and beyond. The challenge ahead involved protecting and expanding collaborative partnerships while maintaining the delicate balance between innovation and institutional acceptance that would determine their long-term viability. Success would require dedicated professionals willing to invest the time and emotional commitment necessary for building trust relationships with wild partners. Michael's headlights illuminated the forest road that led toward his new assignment, but his thoughts remained with the remarkable animals who had honored him with their friendship and taught him possibilities that textbooks had never imagined. The partnership had changed him as profoundly as it had influenced wolf behavior, creating obligations and opportunities that would shape his conservation career for decades to come. Somewhere behind him in the darkness, a pack of wolves was returning to their territory with knowledge and skills that would be transmitted to future generations through cultural processes that ensured permanent change in human-wildlife relationships. The collaboration had achieved the sustainability that would outlast individual careers and institutional changes. The forest road stretched ahead through mountain passes toward Colorado, where new opportunities waited for applying collaborative techniques with different wolf populations in different environmental conditions. The success of generational transmission in the Cascades suggested that similar partnerships might be achievable wherever intelligent wildlife encountered humans dedicated to mutual benefit rather than dominance. The rearview mirror showed only darkness behind Michael's vehicle, but he understood that the light created by their partnership would continue illuminating possibilities for human-wildlife cooperation long after his departure. The wolves had proven that trust, once established through consistent beneficial actions, could create relationships that transcended every barrier evolution had built between species. The experimental collaboration had become operational reality with proven effectiveness under diverse conditions ranging from routine cooperation to life-threatening emergencies. The partnership model was ready for broader application by conservation professionals willing to challenge traditional approaches in favor of revolutionary techniques that honored both human capabilities and wildlife intelligence. As Michael's vehicle climbed toward the mountain pass that would take him beyond the Cascade Wilderness, he carried with him the most valuable knowledge of his conservation career, the understanding that friendship was possible between humans and wild creatures when approached with appropriate respect, patience, and genuine commitment to mutual welfare. The partnership had ended, but its legacy would continue through the wolves who had learned to trust, the techniques that had proven successful, and the documentation that would guide future conservation professionals toward collaborative relationships that could transform humanity's relationship with the natural world. Behind him, the Cascade Mountains held their silence under stars that had witnessed the extraordinary development of trust between traditional enemies. Ahead lay new mountains and new opportunities for applying the lessons learned through patient collaboration with remarkable partners who had taught him that boundaries between species were more permeable than anyone had previously imagined. The road continued through the darkness toward whatever challenges and opportunities awaited in Colorado, but Michael understood that he would never again approach wildlife as an external observer or manager. The wolves had made him a participant in the complex social dynamics that governed wilderness survival, creating obligations and possibilities that would influence conservation practices for generations to come. The future held promise for expanding collaborative partnerships beyond single locations and species, potentially creating networks of human-wildlife cooperation that spanned entire ecosystems. The success in the Cascade Mountains had proven the concept, while providing techniques and knowledge necessary for sustainable replication across diverse environmental conditions. The experimental partnership had transcended its origins to become a model for conservation practices that honored intelligence and good intentions wherever they existed in the natural world. The wolves had proven that trust could overcome fear, collaboration could replace competition, and friendship could bridge gaps that evolution had supposedly made permanent between species that shared the same landscapes, but had rarely shared the same goals. Michael's journey through the mountain darkness was ending one chapter while beginning another in the ongoing story of human-wildlife relationships. The partnership had changed everything while proving that change was possible when approached with appropriate dedication to mutual benefit and respect for the remarkable intelligence that existed throughout the wild communities humans were charged to protect and serve.